Tonight, instead of opening a history book, you are opening a forgotten door that has remained quietly closed for centuries. Beyond it, you find no famous battlefield, no grand political speech, and no legendary outlaw waiting beneath a bright western sun. Instead, you discover a quieter world of wooden porches, dusty boots, cooling coffee, faded curtains, horse-tack wash basins, and ordinary people beginning another ordinary day. You move slowly as though wandering through an old library after everyone else has gone home. Each shelf seems to hold something overlooked. A shopkeeper's ledger, a child's slate, a cracked enamel cup, a carefully folded letter, or a photograph whose names have long since disappeared. The Wild West becomes softer when you approach it this way, less like a legend, more like a neighborhood. Before tonight's forgotten story quietly unfolds, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you enjoy relaxing journeys through history. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Now settle in, get comfortable, and let history quietly unfold around you. You arrive just before sunrise on the edge of a small western town. The sky is still pale washed with grey-blue light, and the buildings seem almost weightless in the early morning. Their wooden walls have faded beneath sundust wind and winter weather. Some storefronts are painted carefully while others have been repaired so many times that their boards no longer match. You hear almost nothing at first. A loose sign creaks. Somewhere behind a stable wall, a horse shifts its weight and brushes against timber. A rooster calls from a yard farther down the street, followed by the soft clatter of someone lifting a stove lid. This is one of the first sleepy facts you discover about the Wild West towns, usually woke gradually. The image of constantly crowded streets belongs more to later storytelling than everyday reality. In many settlements, mornings began quietly, especially before shops opened and travelers arrived. You walk toward the center of town. Your boots meet hard-packed earth rather than pavement. During dry weather, the road can become powdery with dust. After heavy rain, the same street can turn into deep mud, sometimes thick enough to make walking difficult. Wooden boardwalks run along several storefronts for a practical reason. They help keep feet away from mud. They also create a slightly raised path where customers can move between businesses without stepping directly into wagon ruts. The boards are rough beneath your boots, and here and there you notice warped planks or gaps where repairs are needed. The town smells different depending on where you stand. Near the stable you notice hay leather animals and damp earth. Near a kitchen, warm bread and wood smoke drift into the street. Close to the blacksmith shop, yesterday's coal ash still hangs faintly in the cool air. People are beginning to appear. A shopkeeper lifts wooden shutters from a front window. Someone sweeps dust from a boardwalk, although the dust will probably return before the day ends. A woman carries water in a bucket, while another person empties a wash basin behind a boarding house. Daily life depends heavily on water. In some western towns, residents rely on wells. Elsewhere, they draw water from nearby rivers, springs, pumps, or storage barrels. Access can vary widely depending on geography, settlement size, and season. This creates one of those quiet historical uncertainties that rarely reaches popular Western stories. You often know that water was essential, but exact daily routines can be difficult to reconstruct for every settlement. Diaries and newspapers describe some communities in detail while others leave only scattered records. You continue walking. A general store stands nearby with sacks and barrels arranged inside. Its windows are not yet bright, but you can already imagine the shelves filling with canned goods, coffee cloth, nails, tools, soap, tobacco, and countless small necessities. Across the street, a hotel or boarding house is beginning breakfast. You hear pans. The meal might include bread, eggs, potatoes, meat, or coffee, depending on location and household means. Frontier food is far more varied than the endless beans suggested by popular entertainment. Another door opens. A man steps outside carrying a broom. He sweeps the walkway with steady patience, pushing yesterday's dust into today's street. There is something almost humorous about this ritual. The western landscape produces dust generously, yet people continue sweeping it away. You notice clothing as more residents appear. Nothing looks freshly theatrical. Garments are practical, often repeatedly repaired. Shirts may be faded. Trousers carry wear around knees and pockets. Dresses can be protected by aprons during work. Boots show scratches from long use rather than polished perfection. Hats are common because shade matters. Yet even here, the famous wide-brimmed cowboy hat is only one possibility among many. Different workers, regions, periods, and personal preferences produce a surprising variety of headwear. A child crosses the street with something tucked beneath one arm. Perhaps it is a slate, perhaps a basket, perhaps a small household errand completed before lessons begin. Children in Western settlements commonly contribute to daily work. They may fetch water, gather fuel, feed animals, watch younger siblings carry messages, or help with gardens and livestock. Their mornings are rarely empty. You reach the stable. Inside, the air grows warmer and richer with the smell of hay and horses. Saddles hang from pegs, bridles rest nearby. Harness leather needs constant care because dryness does sweat and weather can damage it. Transportation depends upon such ordinary maintenance. Before a horse carries a rider anywhere, someone must feed it. Before a wagon moves, someone checks wheels, harnesses, and animals. The famous movement of the western frontier rests upon thousands of quiet tasks like these. Outside again, sunlight reaches the rooftop. Now the street begins changing. A wagon rolls slowly into town, wheels grinding over hardened earth. Someone calls a greeting. A dog moves away from the road and settles beneath a porch. The town feels awake, yet it is still smaller and more intimate than the Wild West of imagination. Many settlements begin with only a few businesses clustered near a road river. Crossing mining district, military route, ranching area, or railroad stop. Some grow rapidly, others remain modest. A few disappear before they ever become substantial towns. You pass beside a hitching rail. There are no automobiles, no electric traffic lights, no glowing signs. Instead, information travels through conversation, newspapers, letters, posted notices, telegraph offices, and travelers carrying stories from one place to another. News can arrive unevenly. A distant event may already be old before everyone in town hears about it. Rumor moves faster. You can imagine people exchanging information on porches, inside stores, around dining tables, and beside stable doors. The social center of a settlement is not always where later Western films place it. A general store, post office, church, boarding house, school, or even a blacksmith shop may become an important place for conversation. The saloon matters too, but it is only one piece of a much larger community. You notice another unusual detail. Some frontier towns establish local rules that seem surprisingly strict compared with their popular reputation. Fire regulations, livestock restrictions, business ordinances, sanitation rules, and weapon regulations can all appear depending on the place and period. The West is never governed by one single lifestyle. Each town creates its own habits. You move toward the end of the street as the morning warms. Behind the buildings, laundry hangs between posts. Smoke rises from several chimneys. Someone chops wood. Somewhere a hammer begins tapping steadily against metal. The sounds overlap gently. This is the Wild West before legend has fully arrived. It is a place where breakfast must be cooked, beds must be made, animals must be watered, clothes must be mended, floors must be swept, accounts must be written, and children must be reminded to finish their chores. You turn once more toward the waking town. For a moment, you can almost forget every dramatic Western story you have ever heard. You simply see people beginning their day, and as the sun rises higher above the rooftops, your path begins to lead away from the storefronts and toward the open country beyond town, where another familiar Western figure is already working beneath the morning sky. The cowboy is waiting there, but the life you are about to discover will be quieter, harder, and much more ordinary than the legend suggests. Section 2. You leave the last wooden buildings behind and follow the road into open country where the morning light spreads across grassland in long quiet bands. The town soon becomes smaller behind you. Ahead, the landscape opens. You see low hills, scattered brush, a distant line of cottonwoods, and cattle moving slowly across the land like dark shapes floating through pale grass. Somewhere beyond them, a rider is already working. This is where the cowboy becomes real. Not the perfectly dressed figure from later stories, but a tired working man whose day depends on animals, weather distance, and patience. You watch him ride toward a small group of cattle. He does not gallop dramatically. Most of the time, there is no reason to. A working horse needs energy for many hours, and cattle usually respond better to steady pressure than unnecessary speed. The cowboy guides them, gradually turning his horse with small movements of reins, knees, and body. The work looks almost quiet from a distance, yet it requires constant attention. I begin to notice how much of a cowboy's life is spent watching. You watch the herd. You watch the sky. You watch the horse beneath you. You notice whether a cow is limping, whether a calf has wandered too far, whether clouds are gathering, and whether the animals are becoming restless. This is one of the clearest facts hidden beneath the legend of the West. Cowboys were livestock workers. Their primary responsibility was not fighting gambling or riding through towns looking impressive. It was managing cattle across ranches and trails, often for long periods under uncomfortable conditions. The word itself says almost everything. Cowboy, a person working cattle. You continue beside the herd as the sun climbs. Dust begins rising beneath hundreds of hooves. It gathers on your boots, your trousers, your hands, and eventually your face. The smell is a mixture of dry soil, warm animals, leather grass, and horse sweat. Your clothing becomes part of the job. A broad hat can shade your face. A bandana has many practical uses, from wiping sweat to covering your mouth against dust. Gloves help protect hands from rope burns and rough work. Boots with raised heels can help keep feet positioned in stirrups. Even clothing, however, varies widely. The familiar cowboy outfit develops from several influences, including Mexican vaquero traditions, regional American styles, available materials, and personal preference. You cannot point to one universal cowboy uniform. History is rarely that tidy. You read farther. One cowboy dismounts near a fence. The fence needs attention. This may seem strangely unromantic, but repairing fences becomes one of the ordinary realities of ranch life, especially as barbed wire spreads across western landscapes during the late 19th century. Wire changes the countryside. Open spaces gradually come devote. Property boundaries become clearer. Cattle movement becomes more controlled. For cowboys, this means another kind of work, checking fence lines, replacing posts, tightening wire, and finding places where cattle have pushed through. You hold a post steady while another worker makes a repair. The morning passes this way, slowly. A job completed here. Another discovered farther along. You may spend hours in the saddle without anything resembling an adventure. That is another forgotten truth. Much of cowboy life was repetitive. Riding from one place to another could mean long stretches of silence. A worker might see the same animals, same ridges, and same water sources day after day. The landscape changes mostly through light. Morning gold becomes white noon brightness. Shadows shrink beneath horses. The air grows warmer. You stop near water. The horses drink first while cattle gather nearby. Water determines movement across much of the West, especially in dry regions. Ranchers and trail crews must know where streams, springs, wells, and reliable waterholes can be found. A trail without water is not useful for long. You kneel near the bank and touch the surface. It is cooler than the air. You can hear insects among the reeds and cattle breathing heavily nearby. Lunch, when it comes, is simple. Perhaps you eat cold meat, bread, beans, dried fruit, or something, prepared earlier. On a cattle drive, meals are often organized around a chuck wagon when one is available. The cook has an important position. He may be responsible not only for meals, but also for supplies, coffee, camp organization, and sometimes basic medical help. Cowboys learn quickly not to annoy the cook. It is a small piece of frontier wisdom. You finish eating and return to work. By afternoon, you begin to understand the horse differently. A cowboy's horse is not merely transportation. It is a working partner. Different horses may be used for different tasks, and ranchers can maintain groups of mounts for individual riders. Some cowboys change horses during long days rather than exhausting one animal. The relationship requires knowledge. You need to recognize fatigue, soreness, hunger, fear, and temperament. A badly handled horse can make a hard day much harder. You ride alongside another worker whose saddle shows years of use. Leather has darkened where hands repeatedly touch it. The rope is worn smooth in places. Small repairs appear around straps and stitching. Cowboy equipment is expensive enough to be cared for carefully. At the end of a working day, tack may need cleaning, drying, checking, and repair. Nothing lasts forever in dust and weather. You notice something else about the men around you. They do not all share one background. The cattle industry of the American West includes workers of many origins. Mexican and Mexican-American vaqueros contribute deeply to cattle handling traditions. Black cowboys are also an important part of Western ranching and trail history. Native people work in ranching regions too. Immigrants enter the occupation, yet later popular culture often simplifies this diverse workforce into a much narrower image. Even historians cannot determine precise demographic proportions for every place and period. Records or incomplete job titles vary, and the surviving evidence does not capture every worker equally. The uncertainty remains, but the diversity does not disappear, simply because the records are imperfect. Afternoon begins to soften. You help move cattle toward better grazing. Most of the animals are not interested in making history. They're interested in grass. This fact gives the scene a peaceful rhythm. You guide one animal back toward the herd. Another stops stubbornly. A calf calls to its mother. Nearby, a horse flicks its tail at flies. The work requires more patience than bravery. I begin to see why experienced cowboys value calm animals and calm people. Panic spreads easily through livestock. Noise and sudden movement can disturb a herd. A good rider learns when to push and when to wait. Toward evening, the cattle settle. If you are working from a ranch headquarters, you may return to a bunkhouse. If you are on a trail drive, the night may be spent under open sky. Either way, your work is not necessarily finished. The horse must be cared for. Equipment must be checked. Someone may need to stand watch. You remove the saddle and feel how warm the leather has become. Dust falls from the blanket beneath it. Your shoulders ache. Your legs feel stiff from riding. The famous freedom of cowboy life now feels somewhat different. The landscape is enormous, certainly. The sky seems endless. But your schedule belongs to cattle. You whack when the work requires it. You eat when there is time. You sleep where the herd steps. Your days depend on weather and animals that rarely care about your comfort. Still, there are quiet rewards. You sit near camp as evening spreads across the grass. Someone pours coffee from a blackened pot. Another cowboy repairs a strap. Conversation comes slowly. Perhaps there is a joke about a stubborn horse or a complaint about the cook's biscuits. Perhaps someone hums a familiar tune without finishing it. No one needs to perform for an audience. Around you the west becomes dark and spacious. The cattle are quieter now. The horses shift nearby. Above them, stars begin appearing one by one. You think back to the town you left that morning with its sweeping shopkeepers and breakfast kitchens. The distance between town and range seems much greater at night, and yet another part of western life waits back beneath those wooden roofs. When riders eventually return from the open country, some may step through swinging doors into one of the most famous buildings in western memory, the saloon. But when you follow them inside, you will discover that even there, the everyday story is quieter than the legend. Section 3. You return toward a town as the last light fades from the open range. Behind you, cattle settle into darkness, horses lower their heads, and the wide country becomes quiet beneath a deepening blue sky. Ahead, a row of wooden buildings begins to glow softly through windows lit by oil lamps. One doorway is brighter than the others. You hear music before you reach it. Not loud music, just the uneven sound of a piano, a few voices, boots crossing floorboards, and the occasional scrape of a chair. You have arrived at the saloon. It is difficult to think about the Wild West without imagining one. Later stories make the saloon feel almost like a stage where every evening must produce a card game, an argument, or some dramatic confrontation. The real place is often more ordinary. You push through the entrance and step inside. Warm air replaces the cool evening. You smell tobacco, smoke, lamp oil, damp wool, leather, sawdust, food, and alcohol. The combination is heavy but not entirely unpleasant after a day outside. The room is simple. A long counter runs along one wall. Shelves behind it hold bottles, glasses, and perhaps a few decorative objects meant to make the room appear more respectable. Tables occupy the open floor. Chairs do not match perfectly. A stove may stand nearby during colder months. You notice the floor first. It carries dirt from the street. Mud, dust, tobacco, spilled drinks, and bits of debris collect beneath boots throughout the day. Some establishments scatter sawdust across the boards because it helps absorb moisture and makes sweeping easier. It is a practical solution. Very little in frontier life stays clean for long. You move toward the bar. The bartender is not simply pouring drinks. Eyes listening. Someone asks about a freight shipment. Another man wants news from a neighboring town. A traveler mentions road conditions. A ranch worker asks whether anyone has seen a particular horse buyer. The saloon becomes a small information network. This is one well-established part of frontier life that popular stories sometimes overlook. In many communities, drinking establishments also function as social spaces where business news, entertainment, and local relationships overlap. You may come here because you are thirsty. You may also come because you need information. The distinction is important. You sit at a table. The wood feels worn smooth along the edge. Across the room, a card game is beginning. Cards are common entertainment in many Western towns, especially where other amusements are limited. Poker appears, but so do other games that have largely faded from modern memory. Faro is one of them. For much of the 19th century American West, Faro can be extremely popular. You watch the dealer place cards and organize the deal. The rules would have been familiar to many people here, even if they feel strange to you now. Money changes hands quietly. Spectators lean closer. The scene is less cinematic than expected. Most players are simply passing time. Time is one of the great hidden subjects of Western history. There can be enormous amounts of it. A worker waiting for the next job, a traveler waiting for transportation, a ranch hand with an evening free, a miner waiting for supplies, a merchant waiting for customers. The frontier is not always moving. Sometimes it waits. The piano begins again. You turn toward the sound. In some larger or more prosperous establishments, music becomes a regular attraction. A pianist may play popular songs, dance music, sentimental tunes, or melodies carried westward by travelers. The instrument itself can tell a story. Imagine transporting a piano across long distances before smooth highways exist. It must survive. Wagons, rail travel, dust weather, rough handling, and constant changes in temperature. By the time it reaches a remote settlement, perfect tuning may be an ambitious hope. That uneven sound you hear may simply be part of frontier music. You smile slightly. No one seems bothered. A few people recognize the tune and tap their boots against the floor. I begin noticing how different saloons can be from one another. Some are rough rooms with little more than a counter and bottles. Others are surprisingly elaborate. In wealthier towns, certain establishments display mirrors, carved wood paintings, polished fixtures, imported liquor, decorative ceilings, or expensive furniture. Some owners invest heavily in appearance. A grand mirror behind a bar can be especially impressive because transporting large sheets of glass into Western settlements is difficult and costly. Such objects advertise success. They also make the room feel larger. You catch your reflection briefly. Dust still covers your clothes from the range. The mirror does not improve you. You move away from it. At another table, food is being served. Not every saloon offers the same menu, but some provide meals or snacks, especially where hotels, restaurants, and drinking establishments overlap. You might find bread, meat, eggs, oysters, cheese, pickled foods, or stew depending on the town season supply routes and price. Oysters seem especially surprising, yet preserved and canned oysters travel remarkably far during the 19th century. A person hundreds of miles from the ocean may still encounter them. That is one of the West's quieter oddities. The frontier is remote, but not entirely disconnected. Railroads, freight wagons, merchants, and increasingly complex supply networks carry goods farther than you might expect. Still, freshness varies. You may prefer the bread. Near the doorway, two men discuss lodging. Some saloons are connected to hotels or boarding arrangements. Others stand beside businesses offering rooms upstairs or nearby. The boundaries between drinking, eating, sleeping, gambling, and socializing can be surprisingly loose. A single building may serve several purposes. This is especially true in small settlements where every room must earn its keep. You hear laughter from the far corner. It rises briefly, then settles. The atmosphere is not always calm, of course. Arguments happen. Drunkenness happens. Crime does occur. But surviving records suggest a much wider range of behavior than the constant disorder presented in popular Western entertainment. Some towns regulate saloons carefully. Licenses may be required. Opening hours may be restricted. Local governments can impose fines or rules concerning gambling, public drunkenness, or disturbing the peace. There is no single Western saloon culture. One community may tolerate behavior, another tries to control. Even the famous swinging saloon doors are less universal than memory suggests. Some establishments use ordinary solid doors, especially where weather makes open ventilation impractical. Lightweight swinging doors can appear, but they are not an automatic feature of every bar in every Western town. History becomes interesting in these small corrections. You stop seeing a stage set. A stage set. You start seeing a building. Someone has to order the bottles. Someone has to wash glasses. Someone has to chop fuel for the stove. Someone has to sweep the floor tomorrow morning. Someone has to keep accounts. The saloon itself is a business, and businesses depend upon routine. You watch the bartender wipe the counter with a cloth. Behind him, bottles glow amber under lamplight. Many drinks would be familiar to people today, while others belong more clearly to the period. Whiskey is common, though quality can vary. Beer becomes increasingly available, particularly where breweries and transportation networks support it. Some establishments serve mixed drinks. Others keep things simple. You notice that the bartender seems to know almost everyone. Regular customers bring predictable rhythms. A ranch hand enters. A shopkeeper leaves. A traveler asks for directions. A local businessman sits alone with a newspaper. This is not merely a room for strangers. It can be part of a neighborhood. Yet there is another side to the story. Not everyone is equally welcome. Access can depend upon gender, race, ethnicity, local custom, occupation, and the policies of individual establishments. The social world of the Western saloon is shaped by the prejudices and divisions of its time. Historians can reconstruct some of these patterns from newspapers, laws, diaries, business records, and photographs. Other details remain uncertain. Every town leaves a different trail of evidence. You cannot assume that one saloon represents them all. The evening grows later. The piano slows. A card game ends. Someone gathers coins from the table. The lamps seem softer now, their flames reflected in glass and polished wood. Outside, the street has become almost black. You step through the doorway again. Cool night air meets your face. For a moment, the smell of smoke follows you into the street before disappearing into the darkness. You look back at the lighted windows. The saloon feels different now, less like a symbol. More like a warm room where tired people spend a few hours before sleep. And somewhere beyond town, under a sky crowded with stars, cattle are still moving softly in the dark. Soon you will return to that open country. This time you will not be riding toward work. You will be learning how the cowboys slept when there was no roof above them at all. Section 4. You leave the lamps of town behind and follow the trail back into open country where darkness stretches farther than any street could. The last music from the saloon disappears. Soon all you hear is the slow movement of cattle, the creak of leather, and the soft thud of hooves against dry ground. Above you, the western sky seems larger now that no roof stands between you and the stars. This is where another side of cowboy life begins. Not riding, not roping, sleeping, or at least trying to. You reach a trail camp after sunset. The herd has been gathered nearby, though not so close that hundreds of restless animals surround the sleeping area. The cattle form a broad, shifting darkness beyond the firelight. A few riders remain mounted. Their work continues. Night does not automatically end the day. On a long cattle drive, crews commonly divide responsibility for watching the herd. Cowboys may take turns riding around the cattle during the nighttime hours, listening for unusual movement and trying to keep the animals settled. You notice how carefully everyone moves. Noise matters. A startled herd can become difficult to manage, especially at night. The cattle hear things you barely notice. A sudden clap of thunder, a strange animal call, a flapping piece of canvas. The movement of horses, sometimes even an unfamiliar smell, can make livestock uneasy. So the night riders often maintain a calm presence. Some sing, not loudly. Slow songs or familiar melodies can help reassure both rider and cattle, and they also help pass the long hours beneath the stars. You hear one voice somewhere beyond the campfire. The words are difficult to make out. The melody floats across the grass, then disappears in the wind. You turn toward the center of camp. A chuck wagon stands there. If the trail crew has one, this wagon becomes the practical heart of camp. It carries food, cookware, supplies, utensils, and sometimes tools or basic medical materials. Its importance is hard to overstate. The cowboy may be the famous figure of the cattle drive, but the cook controls something equally important. Breakfast. You approach the wagon. A small fire burns nearby, reduced mostly to glowing coals. A blackened coffee pot rests close to the heat. Metal cookware hangs from hooks or lies stacked where it can be reached easily in the morning. The smell of coffee remains in the air. So does wood smoke. Perhaps supper was beans, beef, biscuits, dried fruit, potatoes, or another simple combination shaped by what could be transported and stored safely. Trail food must survive distance. Fresh ingredients are valuable but not always available. Preserved foods matter. Flour matters. Coffee matters greatly. You notice a cowboy checking the pot. There may be enough coffee left for the night watch. Camp coffee earns a special place in Western memory because it fits the needs of the job so well. It is warm, simple, easy to prepare and welcome during cold hours before sunrise. Whether it tastes good is another question. You take a careful sip. Strong, very strong. You decide that sleep may now require patience. A few bedrolls are already spread across the ground. This is your bedroom. There is no mattress in the usual sense. A cowboy may carry blankets, quilts, canvas, or a combination rolled together for travel. Bedding varies according to whether personal means and the kind of work being done. You choose a patch of reasonably level ground. That word matters. Reasonably. The earth is hard. Small stones seem to appear exactly where your shoulders would prefer them not to be. Grass helps slightly, though dry stems can poke through cloth. You unroll your bedding. A heavy blanket becomes your main protection against the night air. In dry regions, daytime heat can create the impression that nights will remain warm. They often do not. Temperatures can drop sharply after sunset. You feel it happening now. The warmth gathered during the afternoon slowly leaves the ground. A cooler breeze moves across the camp, carrying the smell of grass and cattle. You pull the blanket higher. Nearby, another cowboy sleeps with his saddle positioned close to his head. This can serve several purposes. It keeps valuable equipment nearby. It may also create a rough support like a pillow, though calling a saddle comfortable requires generosity. Personal equipment represents significant value. A cowboy's saddle, rope, boots, and other gear may be among his most important possessions. You do not simply leave them scattered around camp. The saddle beside your head suddenly makes sense. Comfort comes second. Security comes first. The horses are nearby too. Some may be picketed or otherwise kept where they can be found when needed. Trail crews often use several horses per rider over the course of a drive because the work can be demanding. These groups of extra riding horses are sometimes referred to as a remuda. Someone has responsibility for them. You listen as one horse stamps softly. Another exhales. The sound is strangely reassuring. Camp life contains many noises that would keep a modern sleeper awake at first. Leather creaks. Cooking equipment shifts. A man coughs. A horse snorts. Cattle call in the distance. Grass moves in the wind. Someone walks toward the fire and places another piece of wood onto the coals. Yet after days of physical work, these sounds may become part of sleep rather than an obstacle to it. Your body is tired. That helps. I begin to understand another ordinary fact about cattle drives. Privacy is scarce. Everyone sleeps near everyone else. There are no private rooms, no doors to close, and very little separation between work and rest. Clothing may remain partly on while sleeping, especially when a rider must wake quickly. Boots might be kept nearby. A hat may remain within reach. If your turn on night watch approaches, there is little reason to become completely comfortable. Someone calls softly. One rider returns, another rises. The watch changes. You see the new rider wrap himself against the cold before mounting. For him, the night is only beginning. You remain near the fire. Not every cattle drive operates in exactly the same way. Trail routines differ by crew size, weather, herd, conditions, region, and the preferences of the trail boss. Some descriptions suggest organized night watch rotations divided into regular periods. Other accounts show arrangements that could change according to circumstances. The surviving records give you broad patterns, but not one perfect schedule shared by every drive. That uncertainty is part of the landscape too. You imagine hundreds of separate camps spread across decades and thousands of miles each with slightly different habits. No two nights are exactly alike. Weather can change everything. Tonight is calm. Another night might bring rain. Canvas becomes precious then. A slicker or waterproof covering may help keep clothing and bedding dry. Wet blankets are miserable, especially when there is little opportunity to dry them before moving again. Storms create greater concerns. Thunder can unsettle cattle. Lightning illuminates the plains in sudden white flashes. Heavy rain turns dry ground into mud. I begin to see why experienced trail crews watch the sky almost as carefully as the herd. Clouds become information. Wind becomes information. Even the smell of approaching rain can matter. Tonight, however, the stars remain clear. You lie back. Without town lights, the sky feels crowded with them. The Milky Way forms a pale path above the camp, bright enough to seem almost solid. For generations, people crossing western landscapes have slept beneath skies like this. Cowboys are only one part of that longer human story. Native communities know these landscapes far more deeply. Travelers, herders, soldiers, migrants, hunters, freight workers, and others also spend nights beneath the same enormous darkness. The open-air cowboy camp becomes famous later because it fits the image of Western freedom. But from where you lie, freedom feels less romantic. Your pillow is hard. Your blanket smells faintly of horse. Your boots are dusty. You may be awake again before dawn. A small insect has discovered your wrist. You wave it away. The stars remain beautiful anyway. Beyond the fire, you hear someone quietly telling a story. The men listening do not interrupt much. Stories are another form of camp comfort. A memory from another ranch. A strange horse someone once owned. A town remembered from years earlier. A joke about a cook. Perhaps even a frightening night on another trail, softened now by distance and repetition. Oral storytelling fills spaces where there are few books and fewer distractions. Songs do the same. These evenings help create part of the cowboy tradition later preserved in Western music and folklore. Exactly how particular songs traveled between workers can sometimes be difficult to trace. Lyrics change, verses are added, names disappear. A tune remembered by one person becomes slightly different when another carries it onward. The trail changes songs just as weather changes roads. You close your eyes for a moment. The ground no longer feels quite so hard. Then the cattle begin moving. Not running, just shifting. Several riders immediately listen. One stands. Nothing appears wrong. The herd settles again. You realize how light sleep can become when your livelihood is breathing somewhere in the darkness. If the herd moves, you may have to move too. The night itself becomes part of the job. Hours pass quietly. The fire fades until only red points remain beneath grey ash. Cold reaches the edges of your blanket. Somewhere in the east, darkness begins turning pale. Morning is coming. Before long, the cook will rise. Coffee will boil again. Bedrolls will be rolled tightly. Saddles will return to horses. The trail will continue. But for a few more minutes, you remain still beneath the fading stars. You understand something now that Western legends rarely pause to explain. Cowboys spent much of their lives not performing heroic acts, but protecting sleep from cold ground, watching animals breathe in darkness, and hoping tomorrow's coffee would be strong enough. Soon, however, your path will lead away from the trail camp. Beyond the cattle routes and dusty streets are quieter buildings where Western families begin and end their days. There, behind simple wooden walls, another forgotten frontier waits. A home. Section 5. You leave the cattle camp behind as morning settles over the plains. The fire has gone cold. Bedrolls are being tied, horses are being saddled, and the herd is already beginning to move again. For a while, you follow a narrow track away from the open range, passing low brush, patches of grass, and shallow wagon ruts hardened by old rain. By late morning, a small house appears ahead. It is not grand. It does not need to be. A simple wooden structure sits beside a vegetable patch. A few fence posts and a lean-to built against one wall. Smoke rises gently from the chimney. A water bucket rests near the doorway. This is another Wild West that rarely receives much attention. The family home. You step closer and notice how practical everything looks. The house may have been built from locally available timber, rough-cut boards, logs, adobe stone sod, or whatever material made sense in this particular region. There is no single frontier house. In forested areas, wood may be easier to obtain. Across treeless grasslands, families sometimes construct sod houses from thick blocks cut directly from the prairie. In parts of the southwest, adobe remains deeply rooted in older building traditions. The landscape helps choose the walls. You reach the doorway. Inside, the room feels darker than the bright outdoors. Your eyes adjust slowly. Sunlight enters through a small window and falls across a wooden table. Dust floats in the beam. A cast-iron stove stands nearby, radiating the last warmth from breakfast. The air smells of smoke, bread, soap-dried herbs, and wool. Everything has a place because space is limited. A family living in a modest frontier house may cook, eat, mend clothing, teach children, entertain visitors, and sometimes sleep within only one or two main rooms. Privacy becomes a luxury. You notice a bed against the wall. It may be shared. Children might sleep together, and larger households sometimes arrange bedding wherever room can be found. Trundle beds, pallets, lofts, and simple mattresses filled with straw, corn, husks, feathers, or other available material all appear in frontier households. Comfort depends greatly on income and location. You press your hand lightly against a mattress. It is not especially soft. Then again, after sleeping on the ground beside cattle, it feels remarkably civilized. A woman is already working near the stove. Breakfast has ended, but domestic work has not. It almost never does. Water must be carried. Food must be prepared. Clothing must be washed and repaired. Floors must be swept. Children must be watched. Fuel must be gathered. Animals must be fed. In many households, these jobs overlap from sunrise until evening. You hear the rhythmic scrape of a knife against a wooden board. Vegetables are being prepared for later. The kitchen tells you much about frontier life. Without electric refrigeration, storing food requires planning. Families dry, salt, smoke, pickle, preserve, or can what they can manage. Root vegetables may be stored in cool spaces. Flour beans, sugar, coffee, and other staples are kept carefully because another supply trip may not happen soon. A cellar can be extremely valuable. So can a pantry. So can a good shelf. You walk toward a row of jars. Preserving food becomes especially important before winter. Fruit may be cooked into preserves. Vegetables may be pickled. Meat can be salted or smoked. Later in the 19th century, commercially canned foods become increasingly available in many Western communities, especially as transportation improves. Still, homemade preservation remains essential for countless families. The work is repetitive, but repetition keeps people fed. Outside, you hear a pump handle squeak. You follow the sound. A child is drawing water. The bucket seems too large for the small arms carrying it, yet children commonly contribute to household labor. You watch the careful walk back toward the house. Water is heavy. A household may need it for drinking, cooking, washing dishes, cleaning floors, bathing laundry, livestock, and gardens. When water does not come directly from a convenient indoor tap, every gallon requires effort. This changes the meaning of cleanliness. Bathing practices vary widely by family, region, weather, and access to water. Popular stories sometimes exaggerate frontier dirtiness, while sentimental accounts can make households seem unrealistically spotless. The truth sits somewhere between them. People value cleanliness, but maintaining it can be difficult. You step around the side of the house. Laundry hangs from a line. Shirts, undergarments, children's clothes, towels, and perhaps a sheet move gently in the breeze. Laundry day is heavy work. Water must be heated. Clothing may be soaked, scrubbed, boiled, rinsed, wrung out, and dried. Strong soap can be homemade from fats and lye, though commercially produced soap also becomes available through stores. Your hands would feel the labor quickly. Fabric grows heavy when wet. Winter makes everything harder. In cold weather, clothing may freeze stiff before drying completely. You imagine lifting a frozen shirt from the line. It's one of those small historical details that makes the past feel unexpectedly close. People still need clean clothes. The weather simply refuses to cooperate. You return indoors. Near the window, someone is sewing. A garment lies across the lap. Clothing is expensive enough to repair repeatedly. A torn sleeve may be patched. Buttons are saved. Fabric from worn garments can be reused. A dress can be altered for another person. Old cloth may eventually become quilt pieces, cleaning rags, stuffing, or patches. Nothing useful is discarded casually. You notice a basket containing small scraps of fabric. Some are barely larger than your palm. Even these may have another life. A quilt hanging nearby tells its own quiet history. Each piece of cloth may come from a previous garment, a purchased bundle, or fabric exchanged between families. Quilting is practical, but it can also become social. Women sometimes gather to sew together, especially in communities where neighbors live far apart. These gatherings provide conversation as well as work. You'll begin to understand how important visiting can be. Isolation is one of the defining realities of many frontier households. A neighboring family may live miles away. Weather can make travel difficult. Roads may become muddy, snow-covered, flooded, or almost invisible. A visit therefore matters. So does a letter. So does a traveler carrying news. You look at the table. A folded paper rests there. Perhaps it is a letter from relatives farther east. Maybe it arrived weeks after being written. The exact speed depends on period, location, postal routes, and transportation networks. Some Western families receive mail relatively regularly. Others wait much longer. Historians know a great deal from surviving letters, yet you also have to remember how many letters vanished. Paper burns, ink fades, families move, names are forgotten. What survives can make frontier life feel unusually literate because written records naturally preserve the voices of people who wrote. The people who left fewer documents are harder to hear. That silence remains part of the history. You walk toward the stove again. Cooking is underway. A pot begins to simmer. The meal might contain beans, potatoes, onions, cornmeal, meat, vegetables, or whatever the household has available. Regional differences are enormous. Mexican, native, European, African, American, and immigrant food traditions all shape Western cooking. Recipes travel with people. They adapt to new ingredients. A familiar dish changes when something cannot be found. Another changes because a neighbor introduces a different method. The result is not one frontier cuisine. It is many kitchens. You smell fresh bread. That scent fills the room quickly. Bread making is an ordinary skill with enormous importance. Biscuits, yeast, breads, cornbread, tortillas, and other staple foods appear according to region and cultural tradition. A good cook understands fuel as carefully as ingredients. Wood burns differently from dried grass, brush, coal, or buffalo chips. On treeless plains, dried buffalo dung once provides useful fuel for many travelers and settlers. The idea may seem unusual to you. On the open prairie, it makes practical sense. Dry fuel is dry fuel. You smile at the quiet logic of it. Nothing romantic, just useful. A child enters carrying eggs. Another follows with kindling. The household moves almost like a small workshop. Everyone has something to do. Yet there are quiet moments too. You see a rocking chair beside the wall. A book rests nearby. Perhaps there is a Bible, an almanac, a newspaper, a school book, or a novel passed between neighbors. Reading by evening lamplight becomes its own form of escape. The lamp itself requires care. Oil costs money. Candles require materials. Families do not necessarily keep rooms brightly illuminated for hours without thought. Night changes the pace of the house. Before that happens, more chores wait. Animals need checking. Vegetables need gathering. A fence requires repair. Someone brings wood toward the house. Someone shakes dust from bedding. Someone else sweeps the floor you watched being swept yesterday in town. Dust returns here too. It always does. By late afternoon, the sunlight turns warmer. You step outside and look back at the house. It seems small against the wide landscape. Yet inside those walls an entire world exists. Birthdays, arguments, meals, illness, laughter, school lessons, repairs, letters, winter preparation, quiet evenings when nothing memorable happens at all. Those uneventful evenings may actually describe frontier life better than the legends do. You hear dishes being placed on the table. The family is gathering. Soon lamps will be lit. The door will close against the cooling air. And tomorrow someone will need flour thread, coffee, nails, lamp oil, perhaps medicine, and probably several other things no household can easily produce alone. That means a trip back into town. There behind another wooden doorway, shelves and barrels are waiting. The general store is about to open its ledger. Section 6. You leave the small family house in the morning with a short list folded into your pocket. Flour, coffee, thread, lamp oil, a few nails, perhaps sugar if the household can spare the money. The road back towards town is dry today. Wagon wheels have pressed 2 pale tracks into the earth and grass grows between them. The air carries the faint smell of sage and warmed soil as the sun climbs higher. By the time you reach the main street, the town is fully awake. A wagon stands beside the hitching rail. Someone is unloading wooden crates. Across the street, a blacksmith's hammer rises and falls with a steady metallic rhythm. Horses flick their tails in the morning heat while 2 children hurry along a boardwalk carrying a basket between them. Then you reach the general store. Its doorway is open. You step inside. For a moment, the room seems crowded with almost everything a person could need. Barrels stand against the walls. Shelves climb towards the ceiling. Sacks of flour and grain rest near the counter. Bolts of fabric are stacked beside boxes of buttons, ribbons, needles, thread, and pins. Tin cans sit beside jars, tools, lantern parts, cooking utensils, and bottles of medicines whose labels promise far more than modern science would comfortably allow. The smell is complicated. Coffee, leather, soap, spices, wood, dried fruit, kerosene, and somewhere beneath all of it, the dusty scent of the road carried inside on every customer's boots. You notice that the store feels different from the saloon you visited earlier. It is quieter, but it may be just as important socially. In many Western communities, the general store becomes more than a place for buying goods. It can serve as a meeting point where neighbors exchange information, travelers ask questions, and residents hear news from beyond the settlement. You move toward the counter. The shopkeeper recognizes several people entering behind you. He knows who lives on which ranch. He knows who usually buys coffee by the pound and who prefers to purchase smaller amounts. He may even know who cannot pay today. Credit is an important part of many rural and frontier economies. Cash is not always available when people need supplies. A farmer may expect money after harvest. A ranch worker may be paid later. A family may wait for livestock to sell. So the storekeeper sometimes writes purchases into a ledger and collects payment when circumstances improve. You glance at the large book resting behind the counter. Its pages contain names, dates, quantities, and debts. A few lines of handwriting can quietly reconstruct an entire household. Flour, 3 yards of cloth, 2 pounds of coffee, 1 tin of baking powder, nails, soap, a child's shoes. Historians sometimes use surviving store ledgers to understand what communities actually purchased, making these ordinary account books surprisingly valuable records of daily life. You continue deeper into the store. Large juice barrels hold basic foods. Some contain flour. Others may hold sugars, crackers, dried fruit, molasses, pickles, or other goods depending on location and period. Customers do not always buy neatly packaged portions. The shopkeeper weighs what they need. You watch him place coffee on a balanced scale. Small metal weights sit on one side. Beans sit on the other. The scale tips. Hera moves a little. It tips back. The process is slow but familiar. A paper package is folded around the coffee and tied or closed carefully. Packaging is simpler here. Reusable containers matter. Sacks matter. Barrels matter. Paper matters enough not to waste casually. You notice a barrel of crackers with a lid nearby. This leads you to one of those small details that feels almost too ordinary to survive in history. Customers sometimes gather around cracker barrels or similar store fixtures to talk. The image later becomes a symbol of informal rural conversation. Whether every general store truly had a famous cracker barrel circle is another matter. Much of that image has been strengthened by nostalgia. The exact social arrangements differ from store to store. Still, the basic idea is believable. People linger. You see it happening now. 2 men are discussing rainfall. A woman asks whether a freight shipment has arrived. Someone else wants to know when the next mail will come through. A rancher complains about the price of wire. Nobody seems hurried. Information moves at walking speed. You turn toward the fabric shelves. Color appears suddenly among all the browns and grays. Blue cloth, red ribbon, printed cotton, dark wool. Small domestic choices brighten rooms and clothing that popular Western imagery often presents as permanently dusty. A woman holds fabric against the light near the window. She rubs it between 2 fingers, checking its thickness. Buying cloth requires thought. It may become a dresser shirt, children's clothing curtains, or household pieces. Whatever it becomes, someone will probably repair it many times before it is finally discarded. Nearby buttons sit in compartments. Some are plain. Others are surprisingly decorative. You realize how much frontier life depends on small manufactured objects. Needles, pins, buckles, hinges, screws, glass, metal tools. Even the most self-sufficient household relies upon long chains of production and transportation. The frontier is not isolated from the wider economy. It's connected to it by wagons, railroads, riverboats, freight companies, merchants, and countless workers who move goods across extraordinary distances. You lift a tin can from a shelf. Its presence tells you something about changing technology. Commercially canned foods become increasingly common during the 19th century, though availability and price vary greatly by region. Railroad expansion makes a major difference. As transportation improves, store shelves can become more varied. Goods that once seemed luxurious begin appearing more regularly. Freshness remains another question. A store far from major supply routes cannot simply replace inventory overnight. Some products may sit for long periods. Customers learn to inspect what they buy. You move toward another shelf. Patent medicines stand in glass bottles. The labels are confident. The science is not. Many 19th century commercial remedies claim to treat an astonishing variety of complaints. Some contain alcohol. Others include ingredients that would later be regulated or abandoned. People buy them because professional medical care may be distant, expensive, or unavailable. The bottles offer hope in potable form. You pick one up and read the elaborate wording. The remedy appears ready to improve nearly every organ you possess. You quietly put it back. The shopkeeper probably has better foffum. Near the counter, a jar contains children notice it immediately. One small customer watches the jar with impressive concentration while an adult discusses flour prices. Candy in frontier stores becomes a small luxury, especially for children. A stick of peppermint or hard candy can transform an ordinary supply trip into something memorable. The child continues staring. The shopkeeper eventually reaches into the jar. Perhaps the store has gained a customer for life. You smile and move toward the hardware section. Here the atmosphere changes. Nails fill containers. There are axe heads, hinges, knives, rope chain files, horseshoe supplies, and tools suited to whatever local work dominates the area. A ranching community stocks differently from a mining town. A farming settlement has other needs. General stores adapt. Their name suggests universality, but their inventories reflect local geography. Even the goods available in 1 year may differ greatly from those sold 10 years later. You ask for nails. The shopkeeper does not hand you a glossy box. He weighs them. For much of the 19th century, nails are commonly sold by weight. They are small, useful, and constantly needed. A broken fence. A loose roof board. A new shelf. A wagon repair. 100 modest tasks depend on them. You hear the door open again. A traveller enters carrying a letter. The store may also be connected with postal service depending on the settlement. In small communities, commercial and public functions sometimes share space. A shopkeeper might serve as postmaster. Mailbags may arrive at or near the same place where people purchase flour and coffee. This makes the general store even more important. You can come for sugar and leave with news from your family, or you can come for a letter and somehow return home with a new frying pan. The boundary is dangerous. You pause near a notice pinned to a wall. Perhaps it announces livestock for sale. Perhaps someone needs a hired hand. Perhaps a local event is approaching. Printed notices and handwritten messages help bind a scattered population together. Not everyone receives information in the same way. Literacy levels vary. Languages vary. Some communities are multilingual. Spanish may dominate in one region, English in another. Native languages remain deeply rooted across Western lands. Immigrants bring German, Scandinavian languages, Chinese languages, and many others. The sounds inside a Western store can therefore be more diverse than the simplified frontier of later film suggests. Exactly how often different communities shared the same commercial spaces is difficult to generalize. Local segregation, prejudice, economic relationships, geography, and custom shape who enters which businesses. Records are uneven. Photographs capture only moments. Newspapers often reflect the biases of their publishers. Ledgers show purchases but rarely reveal every conversation around the counter. So you know the store mattered. You cannot always know precisely how it felt for every customer. That uncertainty stays quietly between the shelves. You return to the counter. Your purchases are ready. The flour is heavy. The coffee smells fresh through the paper. Thread fits easily into a pocket. The nails produce a small metallic sound when the package moves. Lamp oil requires careful handling. Every item has a purpose waiting back at the house. The shopkeeper writes the total. Coins pass across the counter, perhaps supplemented by credit. The transaction ends without ceremony. Yet it connects distant worlds. The coffee may have traveled farther than anyone in the room. The fabric may have crossed an ocean. The metal may come from factories hundreds of miles away. Freight workers carried it. Railroad crews moved it. Merchants ordered it. Clerks counted it. And now it will become part of an ordinary household on the western edge of settlement. You step outside. The sunlight feels brighter after the dim interior. Behind you, conversation continues around the counter. Someone laughs. A barrel lid closes. The shopkeeper's pencil scratches across another ledger page. I begin walking back toward the road, carrying a small bundle of things the household cannot easily make for itself. And tucked among those supplies is another invisible connection to the larger world. News, letters, messages, words traveling farther than most people ever will. Soon you will follow those words beyond the general store and discover what it meant to wait patiently for a letter in a country where distance could stretch for weeks. Section 7. You leave the general store with the smell of coffee paper and lamp oil still clinging faintly to your clothes. Behind you, the shopkeeper closes his ledger. Ahead the road stretches away from town in two pale lines carrying wagons. Riders, freight, and something less was just as important. Words. A folded letter can weigh almost nothing, yet in the 19th century West it may travel farther than the person who wrote it ever will. I begin following that journey. The first stop is modest. A post office may occupy its own small building, but in many settlements postal business shares space with another establishment. A general store, hotel, or private home can serve the same purpose when the community is too small to support a separate office. You step inside one such place. Wooden boxes line the wall. Names are written beside some of them. Letters wait quietly behind narrow openings. A few newspapers are stacked on a counter, their pages already slightly wrinkled from travel. The room smells of paper, dust, ink, and wood. There is something unusually hopeful about it. Every folded envelope suggests that someone somewhere remembered someone here. You watch a woman approach the counter. She asks whether anything has arrived for her family. The postmaster checks carefully. Nothing today. She nods, thanks him, and leaves. Perhaps she will return tomorrow. Perhaps next week. Waiting is one of the great ordinary experiences of Western communication. A letter does not move at the speed of desire. It moves according to horses, wagons, stage routes, railroads, weather, rivers, roads, sorting offices, and human reliability. Sometimes that journey is surprisingly efficient. Sometimes it is not. You pick up an imaginary letter and follow it backward. It begins at a table. A person dips a pen into ink. The paper may be relatively expensive, so space can matter. Some correspondents write closely, filling margins or even turning the page and writing across earlier lines at another angle. This practice can look almost impossible to read. But paper costs money. Postage costs money. A page has value. You watch the writer pause. What should be included? There may be family news, a harvest, a marriage, a birth, a death mentioned gently, a new job, a move farther west. Someone might describe weather, crops, illness, prices, loneliness, church meetings, neighbors, or the condition of roads. These letters become precious to historians later because they record details formal histories often ignore. But to the writer, they are simply conversation stretched across distance. You notice the envelope. Before envelopes become cheap and widespread, letters are sometimes folded in ways that allow the paper itself to serve as its own covering. The address goes outside. Wax seals or folded closures may be used earlier in the century. By the later 19th century, commercially made envelopes become much more familiar. Postal habits change gradually. You step outside and watch the mail begin its journey. A leather bag is loaded aboard a stagecoach. The coach rocks as passengers climb inside. The driver gathers the reins. Then the wheels begin turning. The romantic image of stagecoach mail suggests speed. Reality depends heavily on the route. A good road is relative. Some routes cross hard ground and open plains. Others climb mountains, cross rivers, or struggle through mud, or disappear beneath the snow. Weather can slow everything. A swollen creek does not care that someone is waiting for a birthday letter. Neither does a broken axle. You travel with the coach for a while. The interior is cramped. Passengers sit close together. Luggage is tied above or behind. Dust works through cracks and settles on clothing. The suspension helps, but not enough to make the road gentle. I'll begin to understand why arriving mail sometimes looks tired. At a station, horses may be changed. The driver drinks quickly. Mail sacks move from one vehicle to another. Every transfer creates another opportunity for delay or confusion. Yet the postal network continues expanding. One well-established historical fact becomes clear as you move westward. The United States Post Office played an important role in connecting distant settlements, and post offices often appeared early in the development of new communities. A postal designation could help make a place feel official. It placed the settlement onto a national network. A town with only a few buildings might suddenly have a name recognized far away. You continue along the road. Soon you encounter one of the most famous mail stories in Western memory, the Pony Express. Its reputation is enormous. Its actual life is very short. Beginning in 1860, riders carried mail rapidly across a relay system connecting the Missouri River region with California. This service became legendary for speed and endurance. Yet it operated for only about 18 months. That is the unusual detail most people forget. A symbol of the Wild West existed for less time than many modern television series. You imagine a rider approaching a station. He does not carry a giant sack of household letters. Weight must be minimized. Special mail is expensive. The rider changes horses quickly and continues. The system depends upon stations' fresh mounts, riders, and careful coordination. It demonstrates what is possible. It also demonstrates how difficult long-distance communication still is. Then technology overtakes it. The transcontinental telegraph provides a much faster way to move urgent information, reducing the need for such express riding. The Pony Express becomes memory almost immediately. Its legend grows longer than its operation. You leave the rider behind and move forward through the decades. Railroads transform the postal landscape. Mail can now cover enormous distances more predictably. Railway post office cars eventually allow clerks to sort mail while trains are moving. You step inside one. The carriage sways beneath your feet. Letters sit in pigeonholes. Canvas sacks hang nearby. Clerks work quickly as the train rolls through the countryside. They sort by destination. They bundle. They prepare bags to be dropped or transferred. The work requires concentration. Mistake can send a letter far from where it belongs. Outside telegraph poles pass the windows in the steady rhythm. Transportation and communication are beginning to compress the West. Not completely, but noticeably. A family that once waited weeks may eventually receive mail much faster. The exact timing remains difficult to summarize. This is where historians must be cautious. There is no single answer to the question, how long did Western mail take? It depends on the year, the route, the season, the sender, the destination, the transportation system available at that moment. A letter between two towns connected by rail could move relatively quickly. A message destined for an isolated ranch might spend additional days waiting for someone to collect it. A remote mining camp could face another pattern entirely. You imagine a letter reaching the nearest town. It has traveled hundreds of miles efficiently. Now it sits in a wooden box for 4 days because the recipient lives far beyond the postal route. Distance has one final trick. The last few miles can be the slowest. Eventually a rider carries the letter outward. You follow. The town falls behind again. The road narrows. Grass brushes the horse's legs. Cloud shadows move across distant hills. After several hours, the small frontier house from earlier appears ahead. Someone notices the rider. A child runs toward the gate. The letter is handed over. It feels almost ceremonial. The family gathers around the table. The envelope is opened carefully. No one knows yet whether the news will be joyful, ordinary, or troubling. Today it is ordinary. A cousin has found work. Someone's garden produced too many beans. A relative complains about rain. An aunt sends greetings. A neighbor has purchased a new stove. Nothing in the letter will appear in a national history, and yet everyone listens. I begin to understand how valuable ordinary news becomes when distance separates families. The details that seem boring nearby become comforting from far away. How is the weather? Is the cow still giving milk? Did the roof get repaired? Has the baby started walking? Did the apples keep through winter? These questions keep relationships alive. Letters may be read more than once. They may be passed around. Some are stored in trunks or drawers for years. Others disappear quickly. The survival of letters creates another historical uncertainty. You know the past partly through what happened to remain. A family that preserved generations of correspondence can seem unusually visible. Another family may have lived equally rich lives but left almost no paper behind. Silence in the archive does not mean silence in life. You hold the letter gently. The paper has become soft along the folds. Imagine how many hands have touched it. The sender. A postal clerk, perhaps another clerk. A stage driver. A railway worker. A postmaster. A rider. Finally, the person who waited for it. A message becomes a small object carried through a very large system. Evening settles over the house. The letter rests beside the lamp. Someone will probably answer it soon. A fresh page will be unfolded. Ink will be prepared. The long conversation will reverse direction. Outside the road is darkening. Beyond the horizon, stagecoaches, trains, riders, and mail wagons continue moving through the night. And in countless kitchens, cabins, boarding houses, ranches, and mining camps, people wait for words. Soon, though, you will turn away from paper and return to something far more immediate. The smell of supper. Because behind nearly every Western journey, letter, cattle drive, and day of work is the same practical question. What did people actually eat? Section 8. You leave the folded letter beside the lamp and follow another familiar trail through the Western evening. This one is easier to find. You simply follow the smell. Somewhere nearby, fat is sizzling in a pan. A pot lid rattles softly. Bread is warming near a stove and coffee is being poured into heavy cups. After roads, cattle stores, and mail routes, the story of the West returns to one of its most practical questions. What did people actually eat? The answer is much broader than the familiar image of beans beside a campfire. Beans certainly matter, but they are only one part of a changing landscape of ranch kitchens, indigenous foodways, Mexican traditions, immigrant recipes, military supplies, railroad dining rooms, mining camps, farm gardens, hotel menus, and family tables. You step into a small kitchen. The room is warm. A cast iron pan sits over the heat. A pot simmers nearby, releasing the smell of onions and meat into the air. Flour dust remains on a wooden table where someone has been making biscuits. You notice how closely food follows geography. On one part of the frontier, corn may be important. Elsewhere, wheat flour is easier to obtain. In the Southwest, tortillas, beans, chilies, squash, and dishes shaped by long Mexican and indigenous traditions remain central to daily eating. In ranching, country beef may be available. Along rivers, fish can appear. In farming settlements, gardens provide seasonal vegetables. There is no single Wild West menu. There are hundreds. You sit at the table as biscuits arrive. They are simple. Flour, fat, liquid, salt, and some form of leavening can produce a practical bread that cooks relatively quickly. Biscuits become useful because they require less time than many yeast breads. In kitchens with dependable ovens, families may bake larger loaves. On the trail, cooks adapt. A Dutch oven can become remarkably versatile. You walk outside toward a campfire where one sits among the coals. The heavy iron pot has short legs beneath it and a lid designed to hold hot coals above. Heat surrounds the food from both directions. A skilled cook can make bread, stew, cobbler, beans, and many other dishes this way. Cast iron is heavy. That matters less when a wagon carries it. It also lasts. A pan can survive years of use if properly maintained. You run your hand near the rough black surface without touching the heat. It has probably cooked hundreds of meals, perhaps thousands. Food history often survives in objects like this more clearly than in written recipes. Many people cook by habit. They do not measure every spoonful. They simply know a little flour, enough water, more salt. Cook until it looks right. That makes some historical recipes difficult to reconstruct exactly. You may know what ingredients were available without knowing precisely how one particular household combined them. The uncertainty smells rather good. You move toward the chuck wagon. The cook is cutting salt pork. Preserved meat is useful because refrigeration is limited. Salted pork, bacon, dried meat, and other preserved foods can survive travel better than fresh meat. Dried beans also travel well. So does rice. Flour stores efficiently if kept dry. Coffee can be carried as roasted beans or ground before use. These foods become familiar trail staples because they solve logistical problems. They are not chosen only because cowboys love them. They are chosen because they endure. You watch a handful of beans fall into a pot. Beans need time. That creates another practical challenge. A cook working with a moving crew must plan ahead. Meals may begin hours before anyone sits down to eat. Fuel must be gathered. Water must be found. Equipment must be unpacked and cleaned. Then everything has to be packed again. The cook's day often begins before everyone else's. You hear a spoon scrape against iron. Someone complains that the beans are late. The cook looks up. The complaint ends. You have already learned this rule. Do not irritate the person controlling dinner. You move farther west and south in your imaginary journey. The flavors change. Chills dry beneath the sun. Corn is ground. Beans simmer slowly. Tortillas cook on a hot surface. Long before large numbers of Anglo-American settlers arrive, indigenous peoples and Spanish-speaking communities have already developed complex food traditions adapted to Western environments. The later frontier absorbs many of these foods. The cowboy world itself owes much to Mexican vaquero culture and food travels alongside riding techniques, language, clothing, and equipment. You hear Spanish words around the cooking fire. Some eventually become so familiar in English-speaking Western life that their origins are easily forgotten. Food has a way of crossing borders quietly, humbly. You taste a warm tortilla. It is soft, slightly smoky, and far better suited to carrying food than a brittle stereotype about frontier meals. Nearby beans have been seasoned with chile. The meal feels completely at home beneath the western skin. You continue northward. Another household has planted a garden. Rows of onions, beans, squash, potatoes, cabbage, and herbs grow behind a fence. Gardens are enormously important where soil, water, climate, and time permit them. Fresh vegetables improve meals that might otherwise depend heavily on stored foods. Families also preserve what they cannot eat immediately. You see glass jars cooling after processing. Canning expands during the 19th century and becomes increasingly important in domestic food preservation. Earlier methods remain useful too. Drying, smoking, salting, pickling, root cellar storage. Each method is a way of carrying summer into winter. You enter a cellar. The air is noticeably cooler. Potatoes rest in bins. Onions hang nearby. Jars line shelves. The smell is earthy and slightly damp. A well-designed storage space can reduce temperature changes and help food last longer. Even so, spoilage remains a constant concern. Mold, insects, rodents, heat, moisture. A cracked jar. A poorly sealed container. Food security depends not just on obtaining food, but on protecting it. You return to daylight. A child is eating dried fruit. Apples, peaches, berries, and other fruits can be dried when available. Dried fruit is lightweight and keeps far longer than fresh produce. It can be eaten directly or cooked into pies, puddings, sauces, or stewed dishes. I begin to notice how much Western cooking depends on transformation. Fresh becomes dried, milk becomes butter or cheese, meat becomes salted meat, fruit becomes preserves, flour becomes bread. Nothing remains in its original form for long. Even leftovers matter. Cold potatoes may become breakfast. Bread can be reused. Bones can flavor broth. Fat can be saved for cooking. Waste is expensive. You follow the smell of coffee again. Coffee seems almost impossible to escape. It appears in ranch houses, trail camps, hotels, military posts and kitchens. Where genuine coffee is difficult to obtain or expensive, people sometimes stretch it or substitute other roasted ingredients. Chicory is one possibility. Roasted grains or roots can also appear in coffee substitutes in different regions and periods. Descriptions vary and historians cannot always know precisely what ended up in every frontier cup. Sometimes the label coffee may have been optimistic. You raise the cup. The liquid is dark enough to discourage questions. You drink anyway. Nearby sugar is being used carefully. Sweeteners can include refined sugar, molasses, honey, sorghum, syrup, or other local options. Availability changes with trade networks. A family near a major town may have greater access to commercial goods than a household days from the nearest store. Railroads change this dramatically. As rail connections expand, manufactured and packaged foods can move farther and faster. You step into a prosperous Western hotel dining room later in the century. The contrast is startling. There are white tablecloths, glasses, printed menus, servers moving between tables. The dishes may include steaks, soups, vegetables, pies, seafood preserved or transported over long distances, and ingredients that seem surprisingly sophisticated. The Wild West is not entirely rustic. Boomtown money can create elaborate dining. A successful mining settlement may suddenly demand oysters, champagne, imported foods, fine coffee, and expensive desserts. Whether those luxuries arrive in perfect condition is another question. An oyster traveling deep inland has undertaken a serious journey. Preservation methods improve. Rail transportation improve. Ice becomes commercially important. Still, you may inspect your dinner carefully. You leave the hotel and return to an ordinary home. Supper is simpler here. A stew rests in the center of the table. Bread is passed from hand to hand. Perhaps there are potatoes, preserved vegetables, or fruit. The family eats slowly. No one is trying to create an iconic Western meal. They are simply hungry. This may be the most important food fact of all. Most people eat according to availability, cost, culture, season, and labor. The menu changes because life changes. A good harvest creates abundance. A drought narrows choices. A successful hunting trip adds meat. A delayed freight wagon removes coffee. Winter reduces fresh produce. Summer fills the garden. You look around the table. Different histories meet here without announcing themselves. Indigenous crops, Mexican techniques, European breads, African-American cooking knowledge, immigrant traditions, commercial canned goods, regional ingredients. Western food becomes a mixture because the West itself is a mixture. Exactly who introduced a particular local recipe can sometimes be difficult to determine. Recipes travel without paperwork. Neighbors exchange methods. Workers carry dishes between ranches. Families adapt meals over generation. Names change. Ingredients change. The food survives. Evening settles outside. The stove gives off a steady warmth. Someone cuts the final piece of pie. Another person pours the last coffee. A few crumbs remain on the table. You think about how different this meal feels from the frontier of popular imagination. No endless plate of beans, no single cowboy cuisine. Instead, you find gardens, preserved fruit, tortillas, biscuits, stews, dried foods, hotel menus, coffee, substitutes and recipes carried across languages and generations. Soon everyone will rise from the table. Dishes must be washed. Food must be covered. Tomorrow's bread may need preparation. And before anyone steps back onto those dusty roads, something else must be considered. What will they wear? You have already seen patched sleeves and worn boots. Now you will look more closely at the clothing built to survive dust, sun, cold mornings, hard work, and years of repair. Section 9. You leave the supper table and step into the cool air outside, carrying with you the smell of coffee, warm bread, and wood smoke. The evening has settled gently over the settlement. A breeze moves along the street, lifting a little dust against the boardwalk. Somewhere nearby, a horse shifts beside a hitching rail. A door closes. A lantern appears behind a window. Before tomorrow's work begins, people will prepare something as necessary as food. Clothing. You have already seen patched sleeves, dusty trousers, aprons, hats, and boots throughout your journey. Now, as you look more closely, you discover that frontier clothing is less about appearance than endurance. Garments must survive labor. They must survive weather. They must survive washing, dust, sweat, repeated repairs, and years of use. You enter a small room where a shirt is spread across a table. The fabric has faded unevenly. One elbow has been patched. A cuff has been reinforced with another piece of cloth. A button does not quite match the other. Nothing about this garment would interest a fashion magazine, yet it tells a remarkably complete story. Clothing is expensive in both money and labor. If a shirt tears, you do not immediately replace it. You mend it. If a pair of trousers wears thin at the knee, another layer may be stitched over the damaged area. If a child's clothing becomes too small, it may be altered, passed to a younger sibling, or cut apart for other household uses. Fabric remains useful long after the original garment is gone. You touch the repaired elbow. The stitches are small and practical. Who made them is harder to know. In many households, women perform much of the sewing and mending, but men working alone also learn basic repairs when necessary. A cowboy days from town cannot rely on someone else every time a seam opens. A needle and thread can be as practical as a pocket knife. You step outside again and notice a ranch worker preparing for morning. He wears a long-sleeved shirt. This may seem uncomfortable under the western sun, but covering the skin offers protection from sunlight, insects, brush dust, and scratches. His trousers are sturdy. His boots are worn. Around his neck sits a cloth that later generations will immediately recognize as part of the cowboy image. The bandana. It is surprisingly useful. You can wear it around your neck. You can wipe sweat from your face. You can cover your nose and mouth in heavy dust. You can use it as a rough bandage, a cloth for handling something hot, or even an improvised tie for small objects. Its fame comes later. Its usefulness comes first. You watch him adjust his hat. Cowboy hats deserve the same careful treatment. There is no single hat worn by every cowboy across the West. Headwear changes through the decades and varies by region, occupation, climate, personal taste, and what local stores happen to carry. Some men wear broad felt hats. Others use narrower styles. Bowler hats are more common in parts of the West than modern audiences often expect. Straw hats appear in warm weather. Older military-style hats may also be seen. The standardized cinematic cowboy hat belongs partly to later imagery. Real working headwear is more diverse. You follow another man into the stable, who removes his hat and reshapes part of the brim with his hands. Felt can change form through use, weather, steam, and handling. Hat may gradually become personal. Its creases develop. Its brim bends. Dust settles into the fibers. Two hats that began almost identically may look quite different after a year. That is one of the quiet charms of worn clothing. Time leaves fingerprints. You look down at the boots. Here too practical mythology surrounds a real object. Cowboy boots develop features useful for riding, including heels that can help keep the foot from sliding too far through a stirrup. Smooth soles can make it easier to enter and leave the stirrup. Higher shafts offer some protection to the lower legs, but footwear varies considerably. Not every Western worker wears what you would immediately identify as a modern cowboy boot. People wear whatever suits their work and finances. A miner has different needs. A farmer may prefer another style. A town clerk does not require riding heels to write invoices. The West contains more shoes than one legend allows. You move toward a washing line behind the house. A dress hangs there in the morning light. Beside it are undergarments, children's clothing, work shirts, and a heavy apron. Women's frontier clothing also becomes heavily simplified in later storytelling. In reality, clothing depends on class, occupation, region, cultural background, available fabric, and the changing fashions of the 19th century. A woman working around a farm or household needs garments she can actually move in. Aprons protect dresses during cooking and cleaning. Sleeves protect the arms. Layers provide warmth. Bonnets and hats offer shade. In towns, women with enough money may follow contemporary fashions more closely, even when those fashions are inconvenient. Fashion travels west too. Newspapers carry illustrations. Catalogs circulate. Travelers bring ideas. Stores receive fabrics and manufactured garments. A frontier town may sit hundreds of miles from an eastern city and still know what people there are wearing. You enter a dressmaker's room. Fabric lies across a table. Paper, pattern, scissors, thread, and pins wait nearby. A customer stands while measurements are taken. Ready-made clothing becomes increasingly available during the 19th century, but homemade and professionally sewn garments remain important. The balance changes over time. A household may buy some garments and make others. Certain pieces might be altered from existing clothing. Nothing follows one simple rule. You hear scissors move through cloth. The sound is crisp. A long strip falls away. Good fabric should not be wasted, so the scraps are saved. Even small pieces may eventually become quilt blocks. You have already seen that basket of fragments back at the family home. Now you understand where some of them begin. You walk farther along the street. A Chinese laundry operates in one part of town. Chinese immigrants become closely associated with laundry work in many Western communities, partly because discrimination restricts access to other occupations. The work is physically demanding. Water must be heated. Clothes must be scrubbed. Heavy irons must be warmed repeatedly. Steam fills the room. Wet fabric hangs overhead. The labor behind a clean shirt can be enormous. You feel the heat almost immediately. This is another side of Western clothing history that rarely appears in heroic images. Someone has to wash all those famous shirts. Someone has to press them. Someone has to repair them. Someone has to carry water. The mythology rides away on horseback while the laundry remains behind. You step back outside where the air feels cool again. Farther down the street, a shop window displays manufactured clothing. By the later 19th century, ready-made garments become increasingly important. Mail-order businesses eventually broaden access even further, allowing rural customers to purchase clothing and household goods from catalogs. This begins changing how isolated families shop. A person no longer needs a local tailor or dressmaker for everything. Still, sizes are not standardized in the way you expect today. Fit may require alteration. Clothing can arrive and still need work. You imagine ordering trousers from a distant catalog and waiting weeks only to discover that your optimism about your waist measurement was misplaced. Frontier disappointment can be very ordinary. You continue toward the edge of town. A ranch worker is putting on leather leggings over his trousers. These are chaps, a word derived from Spanish chaparreras. Their purpose is practical. They protect a rider's legs from thorny vegetation, brush weather, and friction. Different forms develop in different regions. Some are broad and heavy. Others are narrower. Again, Mexican vaquero traditions profoundly shape what later becomes identified as classic cowboy equipment. Language preserves the connection. So does design. The cowboy image is not created in isolation. It grows from cultural exchange across landscapes that had long histories before Anglo-American settlement expanded through them. You run your fingers lightly across the leather. It is scratched and softened from use. Decorative tooling may appear on expensive equipment, but working gear is expected to earn its marks. Rain creates another problem. You look toward a dark cloud forming over distant hills. Waterproof clothing in the 19th century does not offer the lightweight comfort you might expect today. Cowboys and travelers may use slickers, oilskins, canvas coverings, or other treated materials to resist rain. They work, but they can be heavy. Wet weather remains uncomfortable. Cold rain can soak gloves, saddles, blankets, socks, and everything else that fails to stay protected. Drying clothing becomes part of camp life. A line near a fire may hold damp garments. Boots must be positioned carefully. Too much heat can damage leather. Too little means putting them on wet the next morning. Neither option feels inviting. You'll begin to appreciate wool. Wool garments can provide warmth even in conditions where lighter fabrics would be inadequate. Heavy coats, shirts, socks, blankets, and other woolen items become valuable in cold regions and high country. Summer may be hot. Winter can be severe. The phrase Wild West covers deserts, mountains, plains, forests, and northern landscapes with very different climates. No single wardrobe fits them all. This is where historians face another uncertainty. Photographs preserve clothing exceptionally well, but photographs can mislead. People may wear their best garments for the camera. Studio portraits may not show what someone wore while repairing fences or washing clothes. Written descriptions help. Store inventories help. Surviving garments help. Yet you can never open every closet from every ranch and settlement. The ordinary clothing of poorer workers is especially likely to disappear because it was used until it wore out. The finest garments are more likely to be preserved. History sometimes keeps Sunday clothing and loses Tuesday's work shirt. You pause at that thought. It explains why everyday life can be so difficult to reconstruct. The most ordinary objects are often the ones used completely. A boot is repaired until the leather fails. A shirt becomes patches. A dress becomes children's clothing. That becomes quilt pieces. The final scraps become cleaning cloths. Then almost nothing remains. Evening returns once more. You watch a family gather garments for tomorrow. A child's sleeve is checked. A button is tightened. Boots are placed near the door. A hat rests on a peg. No one thinks of these things as historical artifacts. They are simply what must be worn in the morning. And when morning comes, some of those children will carry books and slates down the road. Beyond the ranch's shops and dusty streets stands another modest building shaped by weather distance and daily routine. A frontier schoolroom. Section 10. You leave the line of drying clothes behind and follow a narrow road beyond the last cluster of houses. Morning has returned. The air is cool enough that your breath almost shows. Dew rests on the grass beside the wagon tracks, and a thin layer of mist hangs over a low field before slowly dissolving in the rising sun. Ahead stands a smaller building with a simple roof and a single doorway. This is the schoolhouse. It is easy to imagine frontier education as one neat picture. One-room school, rows of wooden desks, a strict teacher and children carrying slates beneath their arms. Sometimes the image is surprisingly close, but as with almost everything in the West, the details change from place to place. You walk toward the entrance. The schoolhouse may have been built by local families using timberstone logs, adobe, or other materials available nearby. It may also serve more than one purpose. In a small settlement, the same building can host community meetings, church services, public lectures, elections, dances, or other gatherings when lessons are not underway. A schoolhouse is not simply a place for children. It can become one of the few public rooms in the neighborhood. You step inside. The air smells of wood chalk dust and a faint trace of smoke from a small stove. Desks face the front. They are plain and sturdy. Some are shared by more than one student. A blackboard stands against the wall, though in poorer or earlier schools even this useful object may be limited. Maps hang nearby. Perhaps there is a map of the United States. Perhaps another shows the world. The edges have curled with age. A teacher stands near the front table arranging books. You notice how few there are. Textbooks can be expensive and families may not always own complete sets. Children sometimes share. Older books pass down to younger siblings. Readers, spelling books, arithmetic texts, grammars, and copybooks form the center of many lessons. You pick up a slate. It's cool and slightly rough beneath your fingers. Before inexpensive paper becomes more widely available, reusable slates are practical tools for students. A child can write a problem with slate pencil, erase it, and begin again. Nothing needs to be wasted. You draw a small line, then you rub it away. History disappears instantly. The first students arrive. One comes on foot. Another has ridden part of the distance. A brother and sister approach together carrying a tin lunch pail. Some children live close by. Others travel several miles. Distance can strongly affect attendance. So can weather. A road that is easy in September may become difficult in winter. Snow blocks paths. Spring rain turns wagon tracks into mud. Flooded creeks can isolate households. A child does not simply step onto a school bus. There is no school bus. The road itself decides whether you arrive. You sit near the back as more students enter. Their ages vary considerably. In a one-room school, younger children may study beside teenagers. The teacher must manage different lessons at the same time. While one group practices letters, another works on arithmetic. Older students may read aloud. Another child waits to recite spelling. The room develops a constant rhythm of quiet activity. Scratch, pause, recite, correct, begin again. You notice how often lessons involve memorization. Students may recite multiplication tables, spelling lists, grammatical rules, poems, or passages from reading books. Recitation makes sense in a room where one teacher handles several age groups. A student learns independently for part of the day, then approaches the teacher or recitation bench to demonstrate progress. You hear a child stand. The voice is careful. The teacher listens. A mistake appears. The child begins again. There is no dramatic punishment, just repetition. Again, slower this time. The lesson continues. This is one well-established feature of many 19th century rural schools. Instruction often combines individual study memorization and recitation, especially where multiple grades share the same classroom. You look toward the teacher. Teaching on the frontier can be an uncertain occupation. Some teachers are young women with relatively limited formal training. Others are men. Qualifications vary greatly by state, territory, town, and period. A teacher may have to pass a local examination, provide references, or simply convince a school board that he or she knows enough to teach. The salary can be modest. Housing may be another challenge. In some communities, teachers board with local families. They move from household to household over the term or stay with one family for longer periods. This creates an unusual arrangement. The person teaching your children may also be eating breakfast at your table. You imagine the teacher waking in someone else's house, walking to school, teaching all day, and returning to another family's evening conversation. Privacy is limited here too. You notice another detail. Some school boards place expectations on teachers that extend beyond classroom instruction. Teachers may be expected to demonstrate respectable behavior, avoid certain social activities, maintain particular standards of dress, or follow community rules. Stories about extremely restrictive teacher contracts circulate widely today. Some are authentic. Others appear to have been exaggerated or invented later. This is an area where caution matters. Popular lists of bizarre frontier teacher rules are often repeated without reliable evidence. The real expectations could certainly be so strict, but not every colourful rule belongs to an actual 19th century contract. The uncertainty fits neatly into the schoolroom. Even education develops folklore around itself. The stove crackles. A child nearest to it is warm. A child beside the opposite wall is not. Heating a one-room school evenly is difficult. In winter, the center of the room may become too hot while corners remain cold. Students arrive carrying coats, scarves, or mittens. Some may also bring wood or fuel as part of the school's daily needs. Someone has to feed the stove. Someone has to clean ashes. Someone has to sweep the floor. Education requires housekeeping. You look at the windows. Natural light is important. On grey days, the room becomes dim. Oil lamps may be available in some situations, but daytime lessons depend heavily on whatever light enters through the glass. Dust floats through the sunbeams. The room is quiet enough that you hear a pencil drop. Then several students begin reading aloud at once. The quiet disappears. A one-room school can become surprisingly noisy. Different voices practice different things. Spelling, numbers, history, geography. A younger child whispers the alphabet while an older student struggles with a sentence about distant places never seen. You glance at the map. California, Montana, Texas, Colorado. The names look enormous compared with this little room. The map promises a country larger than almost anyone here will travel. At midday, lessons pause. Children step outside. Lunch is simple. Bread, cold meat, fruit when available. Biscuits, perhaps cheese, maybe leftovers from breakfast. Some carry lunches in metal pails. Others use baskets or cloth bundles. The food reflects the household you visited earlier. Nothing is separate. School begins at home. A child who milked a cow before sunrise may now eat bread made from flour purchased at the general store. After class, that same child may return home to gather eggs, split kindling, or help with younger siblings. Education must fit around work. This affects attendance. Planting and harvest seasons can pull older children away from school. Weather does the same. So can family illness. Enrollment records do not always mean perfect daily attendance. The number of students present can rise and fall throughout the year. You walk into the schoolyard. There may be no elaborate playground equipment. Children create games from what is available. Running, tag, ball games, jumping rope, marbles, simple contests. A stick can become almost anything. So can a stone. You hear laughter carrying across the field. For a few minutes, the frontier school feels less distant. Children have always been skilled at turning ordinary objects into entertainment. One boy is drawing lines in the dirt. Another child jumps across them. The rules are apparently serious. You do not understand them. Nobody explains. This may be another small historical mystery. Most children's games leave almost no written record unless adults happen to describe them. Formal school reports preserve attendance and budgets more often than they preserve what children whispered during recess. The playground disappears from history faster than the classroom. The bell calls everyone inside. If the school owns a bell, it may be small and handheld. Larger schools sometimes have one mounted outside. The sound is sharp in the open air. You return to your seat. Afternoon lessons begin. Penmanship becomes important. Writing clearly is a useful skill in a world of letters, ledgers, contracts, business records, and handwritten communication. Students practice repeated strokes, the same letter again and again. You look at a page filled with careful curves. The task seems dull. Yet a child mastering this today may someday write the letters you followed across the West. The connection feels almost invisible. A schoolroom creates future postmasters, storekeepers, farmers who keep accounts, teachers, railroad clerks, ranchers who read contracts, people who simply want to write home. Toward evening, the light shifts. The teacher assigns work. Books close. Slates are wiped clean. Children put on coats or gather lunches and begin the journey home. Some leave in pairs. Others disappear down separate roads. The schoolhouse gradually empties. You remain for another moment. The room looks very small again. Without voices, it is simply desks, a stove, maps, chalk and dust. But during the day, it holds nearly every age of childhood together. You step outside. The teacher closes the door behind you. Across the settlement, those children return to households held together by countless forms of labor. And as you follow them home, you begin noticing who performs much of that work. Women are everywhere in this Western landscape, not standing quietly at the edge of the story. Running shops, teaching lessons, cooking meals, managing boarding houses, washing clothes, keeping accounts, raising families, building communities. Your next path will follow them. Section 11. You leave the quiet schoolhouse behind and follow the children back toward town. The afternoon sun has softened. Loom shadows stretch from fence posts, porch rails, and wagon wheels. Somewhere laundry flaps against a line. A kettle lid rattles. A woman steps out of a doorway carrying a ledger under one arm and a basket under the other. I begin to notice something that Western legends often push into the background. Women are everywhere. They are teaching, cooking, running businesses, keeping accounts, washing clothes, taking in boarders, raising children, managing farm, working beside husbands, brothers, daughters, neighbors, and sometimes entirely on their own. The Western town could not function without them. You follow the woman with the ledger into a boarding house. The building is narrow and practical. Several rooms open from a hallway. Beds are neatly made. Wash basins sit on stands. Towels hang from hooks. Downstairs, the smell of stew drifts from the kitchen. A boarding house can become one of the busiest places in town. Travelers need beds. Single workers need meals. New arrivals need somewhere to stay while searching for work or property. Railroad employees, miners, salesmen, ranch hands, teachers, and other temporary residents may all pass through rooms like these. Someone has to manage them. You watch the owner check a list of names. She knows who has paid. She knows who owes money. She knows which room needs clean bedding. She knows who left before breakfast and who has been asking for extra coffee every morning. The work combines bookkeeping, cleaning, cooking, purchasing, repairs, and diplomacy. It rarely ends at a convenient hour. A guest appears at the doorway. He asks about supper. She tells him when it will be ready. He asks whether his shirt has been washed. She answers that too. Then another guest wants to know whether mail has arrived. The boarding house owner somehow becomes an information desk. You smile gently. The West has invented customer service before giving it that name. You step into the kitchen. A large pot simmers over the stove. Bread is cooling on a cloth. Plates are stacked nearby. Cooking for a household is demanding enough. Cooking for paying guests means producing meals at regular times with ingredients that may be expensive, seasonal, or difficult to obtain. A successful boarding house therefore depends upon organization. The owner needs relationships with shopkeepers. She needs fuel. She needs water. She needs reliable supplies. If the stove fails, everyone notices. If the coffee disappears, everyone notices faster. You move on. Across the street, another woman stands behind a store counter. Female shopkeepers and business owners can be found throughout Western communities, although their numbers vary enormously by place, period, and local opportunity. Some inherit businesses after a husband's death. Some operate alongside family members. Some begin businesses themselves. Others run enterprises from home. Dressmaking, laundry, baking, lodging, midwifery, teaching, food service, small-scale trade. These occupations rarely appear in the classic image of the frontier, yet they create much of its daily structure. You notice the storekeeper weighing sugar for a customer. She records the purchase. Her movements are practiced and quick. A child sits behind the counter doing arithmetic. Business and family life overlap naturally. There may be no separate office. There may be no one else available to watch the child. The store becomes both workplace and household extension. You follow another road toward the edge of town. Here a woman works in a garden. Her sleeves are rolled back. The soil is dry around the surface, so water must be carried carefully. Rows of beans as onions, squash and herbs occupy a fenced patch behind the house. Gardening may look quiet compared with cattle work, but it is constant. Plant, weed, water, harvest, preserve, begin again. The produce can make the difference between a winter diet based mainly on stored staples and one with greater variety. You bend near a row of beans. The leaves smell green and slightly dusty beneath the sun. A chicken scratches nearby. Another woman is feeding livestock. This is another established historical reality. Women on farms and ranches frequently participate in agricultural labor, especially when family survival depends upon everyone's work. They may milk cows, feed poultry, tend gardens, help with harvests, manage household dairying, preserve food, and care for animals. Exactly how tasks are divided differs from household to household. No single frontier family follows one perfect pattern. The work depends on who is present, who is sick, who is traveling, who has the needed skill, who wakes first. Life is more flexible than later stereotypes suggest. You hear a wagon approaching. A woman is driving. That should not surprise you by now. Women travel across Western landscapes for countless reasons. They relocate with families, visit neighbors, deliver goods, travel for work, seek medical care, attend church, teach, operate businesses. Some make journeys covering hundreds or thousands of miles. The idea that women simply wait inside cabins while men experience the West outside belongs more to myth than ordinary life. You follow the wagon toward another building. A sign identifies a dressmaker. Inside, the air smells of cloth and hot iron. Fabric hangs from hooks. Patterns rest on a table. A client stands while measurements are taken. The dressmaker's work requires mathematics as much as sewing. Fabric must be measured carefully. Mistakes cost money. A garment must fit a real body, not an ideal drawing. Then there are alterations, repairs, requests for new sleeves, old dresses adapted to changing fashion, children growing unexpectedly fast. You watch a seam being opened and restitched. This work leaves few dramatic stories behind, but it touches almost every household. Clothing wears out quietly. Someone restores it quietly. You continue toward the laundry district. Steam hangs in the doorway of a busy washhouse. Earlier, you saw Chinese laundry workers and the difficult labor involved in maintaining clean clothing. Women also participate heavily in laundry work, both within households and as paid labor. You hear fabric slapped against water. Heavy irons rest near a stove. Hands become rough from soap heat and repeated washing. A laundress may spend hours standing. The work is physically punishing. Yet in towns where single male workers outnumber established families, laundry services can provide a steady source of income. Dirty shirts arrive reliably. Economic opportunity sometimes hides inside unpleasant chores. You leave the steam behind and follow a quieter path toward a small house. A woman enters carrying a bag. Inside, another woman lies resting while a newborn sleeps nearby. The visitor is a midwife. Childbirth on the frontier often takes place at home, and experienced women can provide essential assistance where doctors are distant or unavailable. Midwives draw on practical knowledge passed through communities and generations. Their methods differ according to cultural background and training. Some keep careful records, many do not. This creates a difficult historical silence. You know midwives were important. You do not always know their names. Official records may mention a physician, while overlooking the woman who actually spent hours beside the mother. History has a habit of preserving titles more easily than hands. You pass beside the cradle. The room is dim. A curtain softens the afternoon light. Someone has warmed water. Fresh cloth lies nearby. The atmosphere is tired but peaceful. This is how communities grow, not through grand speeches, through births in small rooms, through neighbors arriving with food, through someone staying awake when another person cannot. You step outside carefully. Farther down the street, a teacher from the schoolhouse is walking home. Her workday is still not entirely finished. She may mark assignments, prepare tomorrow's lessons, or help the family with whom she is boarding. Teaching becomes one of the important occupations available to educated women, particularly as settlements establish schools. For some, it offers independence, but salaries can be low. Employment may be temporary. Marriage can end a teaching career in communities where school boards prefer unmarried women. Practices vary. So do expectations. I begin to see how the women's opportunities are both expanding and constrained at the same time. The West sometimes allows unusual openings because communities desperately need workers, teachers, merchants, cooks, and service providers. Yet legal and social restrictions remain powerful. Property rights differ by jurisdiction and period. Racial discrimination further shapes opportunity. A white shop owner, a black homesteader, a Mexican-American ranch woman, a Chinese immigrant worker and a native woman may experience the same Western town very differently. The phrase women of the West contains many worlds. Historians cannot reduce them to one story. You walk beyond town again. A ranch house stands under cottonwood trees. A woman sits at a desk near the window. She is keeping accounts. Livestock numbers, expenses, supplies, perhaps wages, maybe correspondence with merchants. Ranch management depends on paperwork as much as riding. If her husband is away sick or dead, she may handle decisions herself. Some women become substantial property owners and ranch managers. Others struggle to maintain very small holdings. Popular memory prefers exceptional figures. Daily records reveal countless ordinary managers. You look over the page. Numbers fill the margins. This too is Western labor. Outside, evening approaches. A girl carries eggs toward the kitchen. An older woman brings washing from the line. Someone calls children in for supper. Another woman closes a shop. A teacher lights a lamp. A boarding house owner places plates on a long table. Across the town and surrounding countryside, hundreds of tasks are ending and beginning at once. You think again about the legendary Wild West. Its stories often remember the person who rode into town. They forget the person who fed him. They remember the man who bought a new shirt. They forget who measured, stitched, washed and repaired it. They remember the traveller sleeping upstairs. They forget who changed the bedding. Yet without all of that work, the frontier town becomes impossible. You stand for a moment beneath the fading light. The streets seem different now. You can see the hidden labour behind every doorway. And soon your attention shifts again, because not all Western work fits neatly into familiar categories. Beyond the schoolteacher, ranch hand, shopkeeper and laundress are occupations stranger to modern ears. People who drove freight teams across deserts. People who carried telegraph messages. People who collected fuel from open plains. people who repaired objects everyone else depended upon. The West was filled with unusual jobs, and tomorrow you will meet some of them. Section 12. You leave the ranch house at first light and return toward town with a new awareness of how many kinds of work keep the Western world moving. Some jobs are easy to recognize: teacher, cook, ranch hand, shopkeeper. Others have nearly vanished from everyday language. As you walk beneath a pale morning sky, you begin meeting the people whose occupations once made perfect sense here, even if they sound unusual now. The first appears before you even reach town. A freight wagon is coming slowly along the road. Then another, and another. Heavy wheels groan beneath enormous loads while teams of horses, mules, or oxen pull against leather harness. The man guiding them is a teamster. His work is one of the foundations of Western transportation. Before railroads reach a region, and even after they do, freight wagons carry astonishing quantities of food, machinery, tools, clothing, building materials, mail, and household goods into distant settlements. Everything you saw in the general store had to arrive somehow. You step beside the road as the freight outfit passes. Dust rises around the wheels. Harness chains clink softly. The animals breathe heavily. The driver watches the road constantly. A deep rut can damage a wheel. A steep descent can become dangerous. A muddy crossing may stop the entire journey. Freighting requires more than simply following a trail. You must understand animals, wait weather, repairs, campsites, water, and the condition of roads that may barely deserve the name. You notice tools tied to the wagon. Repairs are expected. A broken wheel hundreds of miles from a proper workshop is not an excuse to stop forever. It is a problem to solve. The teamster may carry spare parts, rope, chains, tools, grease, and whatever else experience has taught him to value. This is one well-established fact about Western transport: freight wagons remained essential to many communities, especially where rail lines did not yet reach directly. The railroad may dominate the larger story. The last miles often still belong to a wagon. You follow the freight train into a dry stretch of country. There are few trees here. That creates a surprisingly basic problem. Firewood. Travelers still need heat. They need cooking fires. They need coffee. Yet the landscape offers little timber. Then you notice someone gathering dark, flattened shapes from the ground. The work looks peculiar until you recognize them. Dried buffalo dung, often called buffalo chips. For travelers crossing treeless plains, dried dung can serve as a useful fuel. It burns. It can be collected from areas where enormous bison herds have passed. Families, emigrants, military travelers, and others make practical use of it when wood is scarce. You lift one carefully. It is dry and light. The romance of the open prairie has just become very practical. Collecting fuel may fall to different members of a traveling group, including children. There is no need for embarrassment. Supper is more important. The unusual detail stays with you. A material that modern visitors might step around becomes a valuable resource in the 19th century landscape. You continue toward town. A sharp tapping sound comes from a small building near the main street. Inside sits a cobbler. Boots line the wall. Some need new soles. Others need stitching. One has almost separated at the heel. Before inexpensive mass-produced footwear becomes dominant, repair is an ordinary part of ownership. Even later good boots remain worth fixing. The cobbler holds a shoe in one hand and works carefully with the other. Leather has memory. It bends where the owner walks. It darkens from oil and dirt. It forms around a particular foot. Repairing it is often better than starting again. You watch a sole being attached. The small shop smells strongly of leather wax and glue. A stack of worn footwear waits patiently. No heroic Western story pauses to describe shoe repair. Every cowboy still needs soles beneath his feet. Across the street, another craftsman is working with metal. The blacksmith is familiar, but the range of his duties is broader than you might expect. He may shoe horses, repair wagon parts, make brackets, straighten tools, fix hinges, and solve countless mechanical problems that arrive without warning. The forge glows orange. A hammer strikes iron. Sparks arise briefly and vanish. Heat fills the room, even though the morning outside remains cool. You step back towards the doorway. The blacksmith understands something every frontier settlement learns quickly. Objects break. There may be no replacement nearby. Repair becomes a profession because distance makes waste expensive. Farther along you find another occupation shaped by distance. The telegraph messenger. A young worker waits near a telegraph office while the operator inside listens to the rapid clicking of a sounder. Messages travel through wires with astonishing speed, but the electricity stops at the office. Someone still has to carry the message to the person who needs it. A boy or young man may take the written telegram and hurry through town on foot or horseback. Technology has crossed hundreds of miles in moments. The final few streets belong to human legs. You watch the messenger receive a folded paper. He checks the address and leaves quickly. Perhaps it concerns business. Perhaps a train arrival. Perhaps family news. Telegraph messages are usually kept brief because transmission costs money. Each word matters. This creates a strange new style of communication. People learn to compress meaning, not because they are hurried, because punctuation and sentiment can become expensive. You smile faintly at the thought. Even emotion has a price per word. You continue beyond the telegraph office. A photographer has opened at the studio nearby. This occupation carries its own mysterious atmosphere. A painted backdrop hangs behind a chair. A camera rests on a sturdy stand. The equipment looks more like furniture than anything you would carry casually. Photography becomes increasingly important across the 19th century West, preserving faces, streets, landscapes, buildings, mining camps, native communities, railroad construction ranches and families. But photographs do not simply happen. The photographer must prepare equipment carefully. Exposure times vary with the technology used. Glass plates, chemicals, light, and processing techniques demand knowledge and patience. You sit briefly in the studio chair. The photographer asks you to remain still, very still. Suddenly you understand why so many 19th century portraits look serious. Holding a relaxed smile for a long exposure is less natural than keeping your face calm. There are other reasons too. Portrait conventions differ from modern habits. A photograph can be expensive enough to feel formal. You are not casually recording breakfast. You are creating an object a family may preserve for generations. The uncertainty lies in how much you can infer from those faces. A serious expression does not mean an unhappy life. A fine coat does not mean someone wore it every day. A studio backdrop does not tell you what their house looked like. Photographs preserve details beautifully while still hiding entire stories. You step away from the camera and cross toward a hotel. A man is repairing watches and clocks at a narrow bench. Tiny gears lay beneath a magnifying lens. This work seems almost delicate compared with freight wagons and blacksmithing. Yet timekeeping matters more as railroads expand. Before standardized time becomes widespread, communities often rely on local solar time. Railroad schedules make this increasingly inconvenient. Different lines and towns can operate on different times. In 1883, major North American railroads adopt standardized time zones, helping regularize schedules across vast distances. Now clocks need to agree more closely. The quiet watch repairer becomes part of a larger transformation. He adjusts a spring. A tiny hand begins moving again. The entire West seems to be learning what time it is. You move on. Near another doorway, a sign announces dentistry. You hesitate. Frontier dentistry ranges from trained professional practice to far less formal arrangements depending on place and period. Some dentists travel between towns. Others establish offices in growing communities. Dental technology improves through the 19th century, but treatment can still be uncomfortable. You decide that your teeth feel remarkably healthy today. The door remains unopened. A little farther along, another man paints letters across a storefront sign. The sign painter works slowly. Each stroke must remain steady. Town streets depend on people like him to identify hotels, saloons, stores, stables, doctors, lawyers, theatres, and businesses. Some signs are simple. Others become elaborate advertisements with decorative lettering and painted images. Before glowing electric signs, the town speaks through wood and paint. You smell fresh pigment. The letters shine in the sunlight. Nearby, someone hangs wallpaper. Another worker repairs a stove. A tinsmith shapes a sheet of metal. A saddler stitches leather. A printer arranges type for tomorrow's newspaper. The deeper you look, the more occupations appear. I begin to understand that the phrase frontier job means almost nothing by itself. A western town requires nearly every practical skill a community can support. Some jobs travel. A knife grinder may move from place to place. A photographer may follow new settlements. A salesman carries samples. A preacher rides between communities. A doctor may cover an enormous territory. A piano tuner faces perhaps the most optimistic occupation of all. You remember the instrument in the saloon. Dust, dry air, temperature, changes, loo transportation. Each one conspires against perfect tuning, yet someone still tries. You can almost admire the confidence. By afternoon, you reach the edge of town again. A freight wagon is preparing to depart. Its cargo has changed. Crates and barrels are secure under canvas. The teamster checks every strap before climbing aboard. The route ahead may take days, perhaps longer. No highway signs will guide him. No engine will carry the load uphill. Only animals, memory roads, and experience. You watch the wagon roll away. Behind it, the town continues working. The cobbler repairs another boot. The telegraph messenger returns for another delivery. The photographer prepares another plate. The printer sets another line of type. The blacksmith's hammer continues its steady ringing. Most of these people will never become famous. That is precisely why they belong in your journey. The Wild West was not built only by people remembered in legends. It was also held together by those who fixed, hauled, stitched, delivered, printed, painted, tuned, carried and repaired. As evening approaches, you follow the freight wagon toward the open road. Its wheels turn slowly over the same earth that has carried stagecoaches, families, mail, cattle and supplies. Soon you will climb aboard one of those vehicles yourself, and you will discover just how tiring travel could be before anyone expected a road to be smooth. Section 13. You watch the freight wagon disappear beyond the edge of town, its canvas cover shrinking slowly beneath the afternoon sky. For a while, the sound of its wheels continues after the wagon itself is almost invisible. Wooden rims grind over hard earth. Harness chains clink. A driver calls softly to the team. Then the road becomes quiet again. You have spent much of this journey following people who depend upon roads, yet the word road can be misleading here. Some are little more than tracks. Others are deeply rutted paths created by repeated wagon traffic. A few are improved routes near established towns, bridges, or important commercial centres. Many are uncomfortable. You decide to travel one. A stagecoach waits near the hotel. Its body is painted carefully, though dust has softened the colour. Leather straps, iron fittings, wooden wheels, and a heavy suspension system hold the vehicle together. Passengers gather beside it with luggage. You climb inside. Immediately you understand that space is valuable. Seats face one another. Knees nearly touch. Bags are tucked wherever they fit. A stranger settles beside you and another sits directly across from your knees. The coach moves. Your shoulder meets the wall almost at once. This is not a smooth journey. Stagecoaches can use suspension systems designed to reduce jolting, including leather thorough braces on some famous models, but no suspension can completely defeat a rough frontier road. You bounce, then you sway, then you bounce while swaying. The passengers develop an unspoken agreement not to mention every impact. There would be too many. Outside the town slips away. Open country returns. Dust rises behind the wheels and drifts through cracks around doors and windows. Before long, a fine layer settles across your clothing. You taste grit. Travellers sometimes close curtains against dust or weather, but that can reduce ventilation inside an already crowded coach. I begin to appreciate every small breeze. This is one well-established reality of 19th century stage travel journeys could be cramped, dusty, physically tiring and heavily dependent upon road conditions. The romantic coach racing across a perfect landscape tells only part of the story. You feel the rest in your spine. The driver slows at a steep section. Everyone leans slightly without intending to. Roads follow geography rather than conquering it. A route may curve around hills, descend into creek beds, climb through mountain passes, or cross stretches where almost no visible road exists. Rain changes everything. You can see old wagon ruts hardened beside the track. During wet weather, those depressions would become channels of mud. Wheels might sink. Animals might struggle. Passengers may have to climb out to lighten the load. A journey measured in miles becomes a journey measured in conditions. The sky determines the timetable. You travel several more hours before reaching a stage station. The buildings are modest. A stable stands beside a low structure where passengers can eat, stretch, or wait. Fresh horses are prepared. Changing teams is essential on long routes because animals cannot pull a coach rapidly across endless distances without rest. You step down. Your legs feel strangely uncertain. The ground is not moving, yet your body seems to expect another jolt. Someone carries buckets toward the horses. A hostler checks harness. The driver eats quickly. Inside food is waiting. Perhaps there is stew, bread, beans, coffee or meat. The meal depends greatly on the station. Some travelers praise particular stops. Others leave descriptions suggesting that culinary standards were flexible. You sit at a rough table. The coffee is hot. That is enough. A traveler beside you complains about the previous section of road. Another says the next one is worse. No one appears comforted. You drink more coffee. Soon the call comes to board again. The fresh team leans into the harness. The stage returns to the road. Hours pass. The landscape changes slowly. I begin to understand why travelers talk with strangers. There is little else to do. Stories circulate inside the coach. Someone describes a town farther west. Someone else knows a shortcut that apparently no driver uses. A woman discusses relatives she has not seen in years. A salesman guards a sample case beneath his feet. Shared discomfort produces temporary communities. You may never meet these people again. For one day, their knees are a part of your personal space. By evening, the coach approaches a river. There is no bridge. Crossings are among the most uncertain parts of overland travel. At shallow points, wagons and coaches may fall directly through water. Elsewhere, ferries carry passengers, animals, and vehicles across. You wait beside the bank while the driver studies the current. Water level matters. Recent rain upstream can transform a familiar crossing. A route that worked yesterday may become unsafe today. Historians can often reconstruct major roads and crossings, yet the exact condition of a particular trail on a particular day is usually impossible to know. That uncertainty shaped travel constantly. Every journey contained information that never reached the records. A washed-out bank, a fallen tree, a lame horse, a broken wheel, a night spent waiting for water to fall. Today the crossing is manageable. The coach moves slowly onto a ferry platform. Water presses around the structure. The river smells cool and muddy. You hear ropes strain. For a few minutes the movement is gentle compared with the road. You almost wish the ferry continued for 50 miles. It does not. Soon wheels touch the opposite bank. The jolting resumes. Later your journey changes again. You reach a railroad town. Steel rails run beyond the station in nearly perfect lines. After hours in a stagecoach, the train looks astonishingly modern. You climb aboard. The seat is still not luxurious, but the difference feels dramatic. The carriage rocks. It does not leap into every wagon rut. The train begins moving with a rhythmic metallic sound. Clack, clack, clack. The landscape starts passing faster. Railroads profoundly transformed the Western travel during the 19th century. The completion of the first transcontinental railroad in 1869 dramatically reduces travel time between the eastern United States and the Pacific coast. Other lines spread afterward, linking new towns, markets, farms, mines, and ranching districts. Distance changes. A journey once measured in months can increasingly be measured in days. You look through the window. Telegraph poles run beside the tracks. Stations appear at intervals. Some towns exist largely because the railroad chose to stop there. Others decline after routes bypass them. Transportation does not simply connect settlements. It can create or weaken them. The train stops. Passengers step down. Mailbags move. Crates are unloaded. New travelers climb aboard. A station platform becomes another crossroads of Western life. You notice clocks. Schedules matter here. The railroad expects people to think about time with greater precision. A stage might arrive late because mud delayed it. A train creates stronger pressure towards standardized departure and arrival. Even then, delays happen. Weather interferes. Mechanical problems occur. Tracks wash out. Snow blocks mountain lines. Technology shortened distance without making nature irrelevant. Night settles beyond the windows. Oil lamps illuminate the carriage. Someone unwraps food. A child sleeps against a parent's shoulder. A man reads a newspaper. Another passenger stares into darkness. You realize that rail travel introduces a new experience. You can cross landscapes at night without seeing much of them. The stage road forced you to feel every hill. The train turns distance into rhythm. You work later at another station. Steam drifts under the platform lights. The locomotive breathes heavily like an enormous iron animal. Workers move along the cars checking equipment. You step outside briefly. Cold night air clears the warmth from your face. A sign gives the town's name. You have traveled far enough that the name feels unfamiliar. Tomorrow another train can carry you farther. Or you may transfer again to a wagon because the rails end before your destination. That pattern becomes common. Railroad to depot, freight wagon to town, horse to ranch, walking for the final distance. Western transportation is often a chain rather than one journey. You return to your seat. As the train begins moving again, you think about everyone you have followed. Mail readers, teamsters, stage drivers, railroad workers, families in wagons, travelers waiting at ferries. Each depends upon roads and routes built from repeated movement. Some paths become highways later. Others disappear under grass. Some wagon ruts survive for generations. You imagine stepping from the train decades from now and finding only faint lines across a field. The road would look empty, but once it carried entire lives. Toward morning the sky becomes pale. The train slows near another western town. Beyond the station you notice something running parallel to the rails. Tall poles, wire. You have seen them before. Now you hear a faint vibration when the wind passes. Those thin lines are changing the meaning of distance even faster than the train. Soon you will follow the telegraph wire itself and discover how a quiet clicking sound began carrying news across the west faster than any horse could run. Section 14. You step down from the train just as morning begins to brighten the station roof. Steam drifts slowly along the platform. Behind you the locomotive settles with deep metallic breaths, while ahead telegraph poles continue into the distance beside the tracks. They seem almost modest. A wooden pole, a glass insulator, a thin wire, then another pole, another wire. Nothing about them looks powerful enough to change the West, yet they do. You walk toward the telegraph office. The building is small, perhaps only one room beside the station. Inside, a clerk sits at a wooden desk beneath a hanging lamp. Then you hear it. Click, pause, click, click, pause. A metal sounder taps out a message arriving from somewhere you cannot see. The sound is quiet, almost delicate, but each movement represents information traveling across enormous distances faster than a horse wagon, stagecoach, or train. For people accustomed to waiting days or weeks for news, the effect is remarkable. You stand beside the operator, who listens more than he looks. Experienced telegraphers learn to recognize patterns by sound, translating sequences of short and long electrical signals into letters and words. The operator's hand moves toward a pencil. He writes. Another message arrives. You realize that the telegraph office is one of the few places in the 19th century West where silence can contain tremendous speed. Outside, nothing appears to move. Inside, words are racing. This is one well-established historical fact. Telegraph networks dramatically accelerated communication across the United States during the 19th century. The completion of a transcontinental telegraph line in 1861 connects eastern networks with California and helps make the famous Pony Express unnecessary. A service built around fast horses is overtaken by electricity. You remember the rider you followed earlier. His horse could cover great distances. The wire covers them almost instantly. Technology has changed the meaning. The operator continues writing. A rancher enters carrying a short message. I want to send information to a livestock buyer several towns away. The clerk counts the words. Telegrams often cost according to length, destination, and the system in use, so customers have a strong reason to be concise. Long explanations become expensive. You watch the rancher remove unnecessary words. Politeness shorter. Details disappear. The final message sounds almost abrupt, but it contains everything necessary. As we begin to understand why telegram language develops its own clipped rhythm, people learn to communicate efficiently because every extra word may increase the charge. A long emotional letter can wander. A telegram usually cannot. You imagine trying to explain a complicated family disagreement under those conditions. Perhaps some disputes ended simply because nobody wanted to pay for another paragraph. The thought makes you smile. You follow the outgoing message. The operator presses the key. Electric pulses travel through the wire. At another office, the signal becomes sound again. Another operator listens. He writes the words onto paper. Then someone must deliver them. This is the curious boundary between extraordinary technology and ordinary legs. The message may cross hundreds of miles in moments. Then it waits for a boy to walk 3 streets. You step outside and follow a telegraph messenger into town. He carries several folded messages. One goes to a hotel, another to a merchant, another to the railroad office. The telegram has become part of business life. Prices can be transmitted. Shipments can be discussed. Train movements can be coordinated. Weather information can travel. Newspaper reports can arrive far more quickly than before. Markets become more closely connected. A rancher may learn something that affects cattle prices before a mailed newspaper could possibly reach him. Distance has not disappeared, but information is beginning to escape it. You enter a newspaper office. The room smells of ink, paper, oil, and warm metal. A telegraph dispatch has just arrived. Editors can now receive reports of events occurring far beyond the town and publish them much sooner than earlier generations could. Readers begin expecting fresher news. The definition of recent slowly changes. Yesterday becomes old. Today becomes desirable. You pause beside the printer. That transformation feels surprisingly modern, yet the room around you is filled with hand-set type and heavy machinery. One technology accelerates information. Another reproduces it. A third carries the newspaper outward by train or wagon. The Western information system is built from many layers. You walk back outside. The telegraph wire hums faintly in the wind. Whether people commonly heard telegraph wires producing musical tones is difficult to generalize, but wires under tension can certainly vibrate in certain weather conditions. Some historical recollections describe these eerie sounds. The image is memorable. You stand beneath a pole and listen. A low vibration seems to pass through the air. Perhaps it is the wire, perhaps only wind moving through nearby grass. History often leaves you with moments like this. You know the structure existed. You know the weather existed. You cannot always know exactly what one person heard beneath one wire on one particular evening. Still, the possibility feels appropriate. The line carrying human messages also produces a voice of its own. You continue along the railroad. Telegraph poles frequently follow transportation corridors because routes, stations, and maintenance access make them practical places for communication lines. Railroads themselves become deeply dependent upon telegraphy. Dispatchers can communicate with stations. Train orders can be transmitted. Information about delays and track conditions can move much faster. This improves coordination on lines where trains may share tracks. You enter a station office. A clock ticks above the desk. A message arrives concerning a train farther down the line. The station agent reads it carefully. The railway landscape depends increasingly upon accurate information. Steel rails allow speed. Telegraph wires help organize that speed. The two technologies grow together. You notice that the telegraph operator seems calm. This work requires concentration. A misunderstood message can matter. Names must be correct. Numbers must be correct. Train orders especially demand precision. Operators develop specialized skills and sometimes use shorthand habits familiar within the profession. Some become known by their distinctive sending style. A person's rhythm on the key can function almost like handwriting. That is one of the more unusual details of telegraph culture. Experienced operators may recognize who is sending before the message identifies them. A few taps can carry personality. You listen carefully. The sounds still seem identical to you. Click, click, click. Pause. The operator beside you hears far more. You leave him working and walk toward another office. A woman sits at the key. Although telegraphy is often imagined as a male profession, women also work as telegraph operators during the 19th century. For some women, the occupation provides skilled employment and a degree of independence not available in many other jobs. Again, opportunities differ by a region and employer. Pay and advancement may remain unequal. Still, the wire opens an unusual workplace. Skill can matter greatly. You watch her receive a message without hesitation. Her pencil moves rapidly. Outside, two men are unloading freight. Inside, information crosses the continent. The contrast is striking. You continue through town. At a commercial office, merchants use telegrams to discuss prices. At the railroad depot, operators exchange train information. At a hotel desk, a traveler waits for a message from family. At the newspaper, another dispatch arrives. The telegraph begins touching almost every part of Western life without becoming physically visible inside most homes. You cannot simply send a message from your kitchen. You must usually go to an office or arrange for someone else to do so. The technology is fast. Access remains local. This creates another historical distinction. The existence of a telegraph line does not mean everyone uses it equally. Cost matters. Distance from an office matters. Literacy matters. Language matters. A businessman may send telegrams regularly. A remote farm family may still rely mostly on letters. An isolated settlement may not have a connection at all. The West does not suddenly become instantaneous everywhere. Modernization arrives unevenly. You walk beyond the last storefront and follow the poles farther into open country. They cross dry land in a straight patient line. Birds rest on the wires. Grass grows around the bases. A maintenance worker checks an insulator. Windstorms, falling branches, damaged poles, and broken wires can interrupt service. A communication network still depends upon physical objects standing outside in the weather. Lightning does not care about urgent business. Neither does ice. Repair crews matter. So do replacement poles. The miraculous wire requires ordinary maintenance. You have seen this pattern everywhere. A railroad depends upon track workers. A stagecoach depends upon harness repair. A household depends upon sewing. A telegraph depends upon people climbing poles. The legend is always supported by someone carrying tools. The sun begins sinking. Light turns amber across the plains. The wires cast thin shadows over the ground. You imagine messages moving above you. A merchant discussing flour. A railroad agent reporting a delay. A family sending news of an arrival. A newspaper requesting details. Some messages will be preserved. Most will vanish. Telegram forms are discarded. Paper fades. Business records disappear. The wire remembers nothing. That may be the most curious fact of all. A technology designed to preserve distance leaves surprisingly little trace of the millions of ordinary words it carried. You reach another pole and stop. The wind rises. This time you are almost certain you hear a faint humming overhead. The sound follows the road toward the horizon. Tomorrow those wires may bring news about rain trains' prices or illness. Tonight they simply stretch beneath the darkening sky. And as the air grows cooler, your thoughts turn toward another place where news and uncertainty meet. A quiet sick room, a shelf of bottles, a traveling doctor, a midwife carrying a worn bag through the night. The West can send information quickly now. Healing the human body remains much slower. Section 50. You leave the humming telegraph wire behind as evening settles across the plain. The last light fades from the poles. Ahead, a small house glows through one window, and beside the door stands a horse with its reins looped loosely around a post. Someone inside is ill. You step closer. The air smells of wood smoke, boiled water, damp cloth, and something medicinal. A lamp burns beside the bed. On the nearby table sight several bottles, a spoon, a folded towel, and a chipped basin filled with warm water. This is frontier medicine. It is practical, improvised, sometimes effective, sometimes uncertain, and almost always shaped by distance. You notice the doctor first. He has arrived after travelling several miles. His coat carries dust from the road, and his leather bag has been opened on a chair beside him. Inside are instruments, bandages, bottles, perhaps a stethoscope, perhaps a thermometer, depending on the time and place. Medical practice changes rapidly during the 19th century. By the later decades, physicians increasingly understand more about infection, anatomy, hygiene, and disease than earlier generations did. But progress is uneven. Not every doctor has the same training. Not every town has a doctor at all. You stand quietly near the doorway. The patient has a fever. The doctor asks questions. When did it begin? Was there pain? Has there been vomiting? What has the patient eaten? Has anyone else in the household become sick? Observation matters because laboratory testing is limited. Diagnosis often depends on symptom experience and judgment. You realize how different medicine feels without modern imaging or rapid tests. A doctor cannot simply order a soul scan. He must look, listen, touch, wait. Sometimes uncertainty remains until the illness passes or becomes worse. That uncertainty follows frontier medicine everywhere. You move toward the small table. A glass thermometer rests there. By the late 19th century, thermometers become more practical in medical use, though they are not yet as quick or convenient as modern versions. Taking a temperature can require patience. You imagine holding still for several minutes. Even measuring fever becomes a slow task. The doctor checks the patient's pulse. Outside wind brushes against the wall. The house suddenly feels very far from everything. This is one well-established feature of medical life in remote settlements. Distance can turn an ordinary illness or injury into a much larger problem. A physician may have to travel hours to reach a patient. Weather can delay him. Roads can disappear under mud or snow. A swollen river can block the shortest route. Sometimes the patient must be transported instead. That may be even harder. You picture a wagon carrying someone over the rough road you travelled earlier. Every rut would be felt. Every mile would seem longer. The doctor finishes his examination. He gives instructions. Rest. Water. Perhaps a medicine. Perhaps a change in diet. The treatment depends on the condition and the physician's knowledge. You look at the bottles nearby. Some are useful. Others are more questionable. Patent medicines are everywhere in the 19th century. They are sold through general stores, traveling salesmen, newspaper advertisements, and mail-order catalogues. Their labels promise relief from pain, weakness, digestion problem, coughs, sleeplessness, nervousness, and sometimes almost every illness imaginable. The confidence of the bottle often exceeds the evidence inside it. Some contain large amounts of alcohol. Others include opiates or other powerful substances. Many reveal little about their exact ingredients. You pick up one bottle and study the label. It appears capable of restoring nearly every part of the human body. You place it down carefully. The frontier has no shortage of optimism. Professional regulation develops slowly. Medical licensing standards vary widely across states and territories during the century. Training varies too. Some physicians attend established medical schools. Others receive shorter or less formal education. Different medical traditions compete. Conventional physicians work alongside homeopaths, herbalists, midwives, indigenous healers, and practitioners using methods inherited through family or community knowledge. The medical landscape is crowded. You follow the doctor outside. His horse is waiting. Another call has arrived. Several miles away, someone has injured a hand while working with farm equipment. The doctor mounts. You travel with him. Night has deepened. The road is barely visible beneath moonlight. The doctor knows the route. That matters. A medical visit can begin with navigation before treatment even starts. You cross a shallow creek. Branches scrape against your sleeve. The air smells of wet soil and cottonwood. Somewhere in the darkness an owl calls. After a long ride, another farmhouse appears. The injury is painful, but not catastrophic. The doctor cleans the wound. This simple act carries more importance than people once understood. Earlier in the century, the relationship between germs and infection is not fully accepted. By the later 19th century, germ theory and antiseptic practices increasingly influence medicine, though adoption is gradual. Cleaning instruments and wounds becomes more deliberate. Yet conditions remain imperfect. Clean water may be limited. Sterile equipment is not always available. Even a small cut can become dangerous if infection develops. You watch the doctor boil an instrument. Steam rises from the pot. The procedure is simple. The reasoning behind it represents a major shift. Invisible organisms are beginning to reshape medical practice. You leave that house and continue toward a small town. A sign above one building reads doctor's office. Inside shelves contain jars and bottles. There may be a desk, an examination table, a few instruments, and perhaps medical books. The room feels less dramatic than you expected. It resembles a workshop. That makes sense. Medicine here is partly intellectual and partly manual. A physician might set a broken bone stitch, a wound treat pneumonia, deliver a baby, pull a tooth, prescribe medicine, or simply advise rest and observation. Specialization is limited in many small communities. One practitioner may be asked to do almost everything. You look toward a cabinet. Pain relief has changed significantly during the 19th century. Ether and chloroform transformed surgery by making anesthesia possible. That is a profound development, but access to surgery-trained practitioners and safe conditions varies widely across the West. A remote community may not have sophisticated facilities. Major procedures can still be risky. The absence of antibiotics makes infection especially serious. You are grateful the cabinet remains closed. You step outside again. Across town, another form of care is taking place. A midwife enters a house carrying a familiar bag. You have already met women like her. Now you follow more closely. Inside, a woman is preparing to give birth. The room is warm. Water is being heated. Clean cloth is stacked nearby. A relative moves quietly between the bed and stove. Midwives can be central figures in communities where doctors are distant or where families prefer women with practical experience in childbirth. Some learn from older midwives. Some develop expertise through repeated practice. Their knowledge may include positioning comfort, postpartum care, newborn care, and the use of local remedies. Much of this knowledge is poorly documented. This is one area where historians remain uncertain because many midwives left few written records. Official histories may preserve the name of a doctor. A community may remember the midwife only through family stories. You sit near the wall and listen to the low voices. No one speaks loudly. Time moves slowly. Birth has its own schedule. Eventually a baby's cry fills the room. The sound is small. Everyone relaxes slightly. The midwife continues working. The story does not end with the first cry. The mother must be watched. The baby must stay warm. Cleanliness matters. Feeding matters. Rest matters. Care extends through the hours afterward. You step outside just before dawn. The sky is turning pale. A rooster calls somewhere beyond the fence. You have spent the night moving between doctor-patient wound medicine cabinet and birth room. Now another form of frontier care appears. Home remedies. You enter a kitchen where an older woman prepares an herbal tea. Families commonly rely on household treatments for minor illnesses. Honey, herbs, warm compresses, poultices, broths, rest. Different communities carry different traditions. Some remedies provide genuine comfort. Others have little effect. A few can be harmful. It's difficult to draw a clean line between medicine and household knowledge because people use whatever experience seems to work. You smell mint or perhaps chamomile rising from the cup. The warmth alone is comforting. You think about how often care begins before any doctor arrives. A mother sits beside a sick child. A neighbor brings soup. Someone changes a wet cloth. Someone stays awake through the night. Medicine is not only what comes from a bottle, it is also attention. That may be one of the quietest facts of frontier life. Professional help matters enormously. So does ordinary human care. Morning light reaches the windows. The doctor somewhere down the road is probably still riding home. The midwife is washing her hands. The patient with the fever is sleeping. The injured worker's bandage is clean. No one knows exactly what tomorrow will bring. That uncertainty never leaves the frontier. But for now, the night has passed, and as evening eventually returns, another forgotten part of Western life begins to appear. Oil lamps glow, porches cool, animals settle, voices soften. The towns and ranches become different places after sunset. Soon you will walk through those quieter hours and discover what the Wild West sounded like at night. Section 60. You leave the doctor's office behind and step into a town that is slowly surrendering its daylight. The heat of afternoon has weakened. Shadows stretch across the main street, touching hitching rails, porch posts, wagon wheels, and the uneven edges of wooden buildings. A few windows begin to glow as lamps are lit inside. The west changes after sunset. Work does not stop completely, but its rhythm softens. You walk past the general store. The door is being closed. The shopkeeper brings in a crate left outside, checks the latch, and lowers a shade across the window. Inside, the last customer folds a purchase beneath one arm and steps onto the boardwalk. Boots sound louder now. During the day wheels, horses, tools, voices, and trade fill the street with constant movement. At night, individual sounds separate. A chair scraping across a floor, a horse snorting beside a stable. A bucket being set down behind a house. Someone calling a child indoors. A piano note from far away. The town does not become silent. It becomes easier to hear. You continue toward a row of homes. Light leaks through curtains in warm yellow rectangles. Most households depend on candles, kerosene, lamps, oil lamps, or other forms of flame for illumination, depending on period and location. Electric lighting begins appearing in some western cities and prosperous towns during the later 19th century, but large areas remain dependent on older technologies. You enter a modest home. One lamp stands in the center of the dell. It does not flood the room with light. Instead, it creates a small glowing island. Faces near the lamp are clear. The corners remain shadowed. I begin to understand how artificial light shapes evening activity. Tasks gather near the flame. Someone reads. Someone sews. Someone writes a letter. A child finishes arithmetic beside an older sibling. The rest of the room seems to withdraw into darkness. Lamp fuel costs money, so light can be used carefully. A family may not keep every room brightly lit without reason. The day is still partly governed by the sun. Summer allows longer evenings of natural light. Winter brings darkness early. You move closer to the lamp. Its glass chimney is warm. Soot can collect if the wick is poorly adjusted. The wick itself needs trimming. The reservoir needs filling. Even illumination requires maintenance. This is one well-established reality of 19th century domestic life. Artificial light was more limited, more labor-intensive, and often more expensive relative to household income than the effortless lighting you know today. That limitation affects behavior. People may rise earlier. Evenings can become quieter. Work requiring fine detail becomes harder after dark. You look toward the window. Outside, the street has nearly disappeared. There may be moonlight. There may not. A cloudy night without electric street lighting can make a western town remarkably dark. Some communities install lamps along important streets. Hotels and businesses may place lanterns near entrances, but beyond those small circles of light, darkness remains deep. You step outside again. Your eyes adjust. The boardwalk is pale beneath the moon. The street itself has become a broad shadow. You hear laughter from the saloon. That building remains active later than most. Music drifts through the door when someone enters. A piano plays a familiar tune. Cards are still moving across tables. But even there, the evening is not necessarily wild. Some customers are simply sitting. A ranch worker drinks slowly after a long day. A traveler reads a newspaper beneath a lamp. Two men discuss tomorrow's freight delivery. Another person is writing a note. You stay near the doorway rather than entering. Tonight you are following quieter sounds. You move toward the seal. The smell of hay becomes stronger in the cool air. A lantern and hangs from a beam. The stable worker checks animals before sleeping. Horses need water. Feed must be arranged. A loose gate must be secured. One animal has thrown bedding across the stall. Another is chewing with complete contentment. The worker runs a hand down a horse's leg. He checks for swelling. Working animals cannot simply be parked until morning. They require evening care. The same is true on ranches. Cattle may need checking. Milk cows still need milking. Chickens need securing from predators. A horse left saddled all night will not appreciate your sense of frontier romance. You leave the stable and follow a road beyond town. The sky becomes enormous. Without strong artificial light, stars appear more numerous than you remember. The Milky Way stretches overhead like pale smoke. You can understand why night skies become such a powerful part of Western memory. But they are not only beautiful, they are useful. Travelers can orient themselves by familiar stars. People watch moon phases. Night workers use whatever natural light is available. A ranch hand riding after dark notices the sky as part of the working landscape. You hear cattle in the distance. A low call. Then another. Night watch continues on some ranches and trail drives. You remember the cattle camp from earlier. The same patient routines return. A rider moves slowly around the herd. His silhouette crosses a ridge. He may sing softly. Songs at night serve several purposes. They pass time. They help riders remain alert. And many cowboys believed quiet singing helped keep cattle settled. Exactly how universal this practice was is difficult to determine. Memoirs and later cowboy traditions describe singing around herds, but not every crew behaved identically. Some riders may have sung often. Others probably preferred silence. The songs themselves also changed over time. Verses drifted from one camp to another. Some disappeared. Others survived because collectors wrote them down later. You listen. The melody is too distant to identify. Perhaps that is appropriate. Most songs sung beneath western stars vanished into the same darkness that heard them. You walk farther. A coyote calls. The sound carries astonishingly well. Another answers from somewhere across the plain. Night wildlife becomes more noticeable after human activity settles. Owls move silently near barns. Insects hum around water. Bats pass overhead. Dogs bark at things you cannot see. A horse raises its head suddenly listening. You stop too. Nothing happens. The animal lowers its head. You continue. Around a ranch house, a few people sit on the porch. The day's heat still lingers in the walls, but the air outside is cooler. Porches become natural evening rooms in warm weather. Neighbors talk. Someone repairs a piece of harness. A woman shells beans into a bowl. A child leans against a post, becoming steadily sleepier while insisting otherwise. Conversation moves without urgency. Weather. Livestock. A neighbor's new wagon. A letter received last week. A rumor about railroad construction. Someone tells a story heard years ago. You sit on the porch step. This is another kind of Western entertainment. No ticket. No stage. No scheduled beginning. Simply conversation after work. Storytelling flourishes in places where people spend long evenings together. Stories change with repetition. A difficult journey becomes slightly longer. A stubborn horse becomes slightly more stubborn. A storm grows a little larger every year. Memory improves the weather in whichever direction makes the story better. You can hear subtle laughter. Nothing needs to be verified. Not tonight. Inside someone winds a clock. The sound reminds you how carefully time must be maintained. A mechanical clock can drift. It must be wound regularly. A household without one may depend on watches, church bells, railroad time, the sun, or the routines of animals and work. Night itself is still measured less precisely for many people than modern schedules suggest. After supper may be enough. Before dawn may be enough. The exact minute matters mostly when trains are involved. You look toward the road. A rider appears carrying a lantern. The small light swings with the horse's movement. Traveling at night has advantages and risks. In hot regions, cooler temperatures can make evening movement attractive. But roads are harder to read. Animals may stumble. A missy turn can become a long mistake. Lantern light reaches only a short distance. The rider passes you. For a moment, the glow illuminates dust beneath the horse. Then darkness closes behind him. You continue toward another building where music is playing. This time it is not a saloon. A community dance is underway. In small Western settlements, dances, socials, church gatherings, and community events can provide important opportunities for recreation and companionship. Fiddles are common in many communities. So are other portable instruments. A piano, if one is available, becomes valuable. You step inside. The room is bright compared with the road. Couples move across a wooden floor. Boots and shoes produce a steady rhythm. Children sit near the wall. Older residents talk from chairs. Food waits on a side table. This is the social West. People separated by miles of farms and ranches can gather for a few hours. Young adults meet. Neighbors exchange news. Families strengthen relationships. Music makes the isolation feel smaller. You stay only briefly. Outside again, the night feels even quieter after the dance. You walk toward the town cemetery road, not because anything frightening waits there. It does not. The path simply offers darkness away from the buildings. You pause. The town behind you glows in scattered points. One lamp in the hotel. Several windows at the boarding house. The saloon. A late working telegraph office. Perhaps the doctor still awake. Each light represents someone whose day has not yet ended. Then gradually the lights disappear. A lamp is turned down. A door closes. Another window goes dark. The settlement seems to shrink. By midnight, only a few people remain awake. Night watchmen may patrol businesses or warehouses in larger towns. Railroad workers continue wherever schedules demand. Telegraph operators may work late shifts. Hotel clerks receive travelers at inconvenient hours. Doctors answer calls. Mothers soothe children. People with insomnia stare at ceilings. The West sleeps unevenly. You return toward the boarding house. Your room is small. A wash basin stands beside the bed. You remove dusty boots and place them near the wall. Outside, the last wagon of the evening passes. Its wheels fade. Then there is only wind. You lie down. Through the thin wall, someone coughs once. A clock ticks downstairs. A horse stamps in the street. The building creaks as the temperature falls. These are the sounds that fill the ordinary Western night. Not gunfire. Not constant shouting. Wood. Wind. Animals. Human movement. A town settling into sleep. And beyond the final row of houses, there are places where even these sounds eventually disappear. Some towns will not merely sleep. They will empty. Mines will close. Railroads will move elsewhere. Businesses will board their windows. Streets will return slowly to weeds and dust. When morning comes, you will begin following the roads toward those vanished settlements and discover how quickly a Western town could become a memory. Section 17. You work before sunrise and leave the boarding house while most of the town still sleeps. The street is cool and pale. A thin mist rests near the ground, and yesterday's wagon tracks have become soft shadows beneath the morning light. Behind you, one chimney begins to smoke. Ahead the road leads toward a place that once looked very much like this one. A town with stores, a hotel, a saloon, homes, a post office, perhaps a school. Now almost nothing moves there. You follow the road west. The landscape grows quieter as the miles pass. Fence lines disappear. The telegraph poles end. Grass grows higher between the wagon ruts. By late morning, you notice the first sign. A weathered board stands beside the road. Most of the lettering has faded. Beyond it, several buildings lean beneath the sun. You have arrived at a ghost town. The phrase sounds mysterious. The reality is often surprisingly practical. Western towns can grow very quickly when something valuable attracts people. A mine opens. A railroad arrives. A ranching district expands. A military post creates demand. Land speculation brings settlers. A new transportation route produces traffic. Within months, buildings may appear along streets that previously did not exist. Then circumstances change, and the town begins to disappear. You step onto what was once the main street. Weeds grow through the earth. The boardwalk has collapsed in several places. One storefront still has glass in a window, though most panes are broken or missing. A faded sign hangs above another doorway. You try to imagine the street alive. Wagons arriving, children running, someone sweeping dust from a porch, a freight driver asking directions, coffee being poured in a hotel kitchen, the general store opening its shutters. Everything you have seen during your journey may once have happened here. That is what makes the silence feel unusual. This place was ordinary first. You walk toward a former mining office. Mining is one of the strongest forces behind rapid Western town growth. A valuable discovery can attract prospectors. Merchants, cooks, builders, laborers, investors, and families with remarkable speed. Housing appears. Stores open. Claims are recorded. Hotels fill. Newspapers may begin printing. For a while the town seems permanent, but the valuable material beneath the ground is not unlimited. Ore becomes harder to reach. Prices fall. A mine floods. Investors withdraw. Another discovery attracts workers somewhere else. A boom can become a decline almost as quickly as it began. This is one well-established pattern behind many Western ghost towns. Their populations often depended upon a narrow economic purpose. When that purpose failed, people moved. You step inside the mining office. Dust covers the floor. A broken shelf leans against the wall. There might once have been account books here. Maps, pay records, or samples, letters from investors. Most are gone. Paper rarely survives abandonment well. Wind enters through the window frame. You hear it move through dry grass outside. The town now has a different economy. Nothing is bought. Nothing is sold. The only traffic belongs to insects and birds. You continue toward a row of houses. One is missing its roof. Another still has wallpaper inside. You can see small blue flowers printed across a section of plaster. The detail changes everything. Someone chose that pattern. Perhaps a family ordered the paper from a catalogue. Perhaps a merchant carried it in by rail. Someone stood in this room and pressed it carefully against the wall. You touch the faded edge. This was not a temporary stage set to the people who lived here. They decorated. They planted gardens. They repaired doors. They expected another winter. That is the unusual detail hidden inside many abandoned towns. People often behaved as though the settlement would last, because while they were living there, it probably felt permanent. You walk toward the schoolhouse. The door hangs open. Inside, dust covers a row of desks. A bird has built a nest near the ceiling. You imagine the classroom when it was full. Children reciting multiplication tables. The teacher warming hands near a stove. Lunch pails lined against a wall. Now the nearest family may live many miles away. A town can lose adults and children at the same time. When employment disappears, schools shrink. Shops lose customers. Doctors leave. Post offices close. One departure makes another departure more likely. The decline becomes a chain. You follow that chain toward the railroad tracks, or rather where the tracks once were. Only a raised bed remains. Railroads can create towns, but they can also abandon them. A company selects a route. A station becomes valuable. Hotels appear. Warehouses are built. Freight arrives. Land prices increase. Then a route changes. A line closes. A newer settlement receives the important junction. The old town suddenly sits beside a road nobody needs. You stand where the platform once stood. There is no train, no whistle, no clock, only wind. Transportation has moved elsewhere. Life follows. This reminds you of the freight wagon from earlier. The West is full of places that depend on movement. When the movement stops, the settlement can become stranded. Not every abandoned town disappears quickly. Some decline over decades. A few residents remain after everyone else has left. Perhaps they own property. Perhaps they have nowhere else they want to go. Perhaps the town is still home even without the businesses that once justified its existence. You imagine one elderly resident living beside a street of empty buildings. At night there may be only one lamp burning. That image appears in several historical accounts and later local stories, though the exact details vary. It is difficult to know when a town officially becomes a ghost town. There is no universal moment. One family may leave in March, another in June. The post office closes years later. A rancher continues using a building for storage. A traveller moves into an abandoned cabin. Does the town die when the mine closes? When the school closes? When the final resident leaves? Historians and preservationists use the term in different ways. The uncertainty feels appropriate. Towns fade gradually even when legends say they vanished overnight. You walk toward the cemetery. Unlike the main street, it may remain surprisingly intact. Names are carved into stone. Some markers are wooden and nearly unreadable. Others stand firmly after more than a century. The cemetery explains something important. People can leave. Their memories stay attached to the land. Families who moved away may still return to maintain graves. Local historical groups may later preserve them. The town can disappear commercially while remaining emotionally alive. You read a few names. Some belong to infants, some to elderly residents, some to people who lived only a few years in the settlement. No famous outlaw appears, no legendary sheriff, just families. That seems right. Ghost towns are often remembered for dramatic stories, but their real history is filled with ordinary residents whose lives rarely entered newspapers. You continue toward a hotel. The front wall has partly collapsed. Through the opening, you see a staircase leading nowhere. Rooms once held strangers, salesmen, miners, railroad workers, families waiting to move farther west. Perhaps someone once sat near a window writing the letter you followed in an earlier section. Perhaps a cook downstairs worried about a flower. Perhaps a laundress complained about the water supply. The building connects every part of your journey. Then you notice something on the floor, a fragment of ceramic, white glaze, a thin painted line around the edge. You pick it up carefully. It was probably part of a plate. Not valuable. Not rare, but someone ate from it. That simple fact makes the ruined hotel feel inhabited again. Archaeologists working in abandoned Western settlements often learn enormous amounts from ordinary objects. Broken dishes, bottles, nails, food remains, buttons, coins, tools, children's toys, discarded cans. The things people threw away can reveal what stores stocked, what families ate, where goods came from, and how households spent money. Trash becomes evidence. You almost smile. History has strange standards of importance. A broken plate ignored in 1880 may become fascinating a century later. You place the fragment back where you found it. The afternoon grows warmer. A lizard moves across a foundation stone. You walk toward the far edge of town. Some buildings have already disappeared completely. Wooden structures can be dismantled and moved. Lumber is valuable. When residents leave, they may take doors, windows, roofing boards, stoves, and hardware with them. An abandoned building becomes a supply of useful material. This helps explain why some towns seem to vanish more completely than others. They were not simply left to decay. They were recycled. A house might disappear from one street and quietly reappear as part of a barn 20 miles away. The town travels after death. You look across the empty lots. Wild grass has reclaimed them. Rain softens old roads. Foundation stones sink. Trees grow where porches once stood. Nature does not need to erase the town quickly. It has patience. So does memory. By evening, shadows fill the empty windows. The place becomes colder. You sit briefly on the remains of a boardwalk. There is no reason to feel afraid. The town is peaceful. It simply no longer needs to wake tomorrow. That may be the quietest kind of disappearance. No final bell. No official ending. Just fewer customers. Fewer children. Fewer lamps at night. Then none. You stand and begin walking back toward the road. Behind you, the empty settlement grows smaller. You have now seen how the West could build communities with astonishing speed and lose them just as quietly. And that leaves you ready for another question. If real Western life was filled with school lessons, laundry ledgers, repairs, waiting, mud-tired horses, and ordinary meals, how did the later legend become so different? Your next steps will lead directly into that gap between the West people actually lived and the West that Hollywood later remembered. Section 8. You leave the abandoned town behind and follow the road toward a place that exists less on the landscape than in memory. The evening sun falls across the empty buildings behind you. Ahead, there is only open country. For the first time in a while, you begin thinking not about what happened in the West, but about how people later chose to remember it. The difference is larger than you expect. You have already seen the ordinary reality: cowboys repairing fences, women keeping ledgers, children carrying lunch to school, teamsters worrying about broken wheels, families waiting for mail, cooks protecting coffee pots, storekeepers measuring nails by weight, doctors riding through darkness. None of this looks much like the West that later fills novels, stage shows, paintings, radio dramas, films, and television. That later West moves faster. It is louder. Its streets are cleaner when the story requires them to be, and more dangerous when excitement is needed. Its cowboys rarely spend an afternoon fixing a gate. Its heroes almost never worry about laundry. You continue walking. The road bends toward a small town where a photographer once worked. A faded poster hangs inside an old building. It advertises a traveling Western show. This is one of the important ways the myth begins to grow. Even before motion pictures, audiences are fascinated by frontier stories. Dime novels turn Western figures into dramatic characters. Traveling shows recreate riding, shooting, hunting, and scenes presented as frontier life. Performers carry these images to audiences who may never have traveled west themselves. The West becomes entertainment while much of the actual frontier still exists. That is one well-established historical fact. The mythology does not wait until everything is over. It begins forming while people are still living inside the events being transformed. You imagine a ranch worker reading a sensational story about cowboys after spending 10 hours moving cattle. He might recognize the hat, perhaps the horse. The rest could feel surprisingly unfamiliar. Still, the stories are enjoyable. That matters. Myths do not survive only because they are inaccurate. They survive because they satisfy something. They make distance feel adventurous. They turn uncertainty into clear characters. They replace repetitive labor with decisive moments. An actual cattle drive contains days of dust routine weather, watching animal care and exhaustion. A fictional cattle drive can compress all of that into one dramatic crossing. Reality requires weeks. A story requires an evening. You reach the town. A saloon stands on the main street. You have visited one before. This time you look at it through the eyes of later Western storytelling. Swinging doors, card players, a bartender polishing a glass, perhaps a stranger entering while everyone suddenly becomes quiet. It is a familiar scene. The real saloon could certainly contain gambling, alcohol, arguments, and tension, but it also contained business discussions, meals, music travelers asking directions, local news, and long periods when nothing remarkable happened. Nothing remarkable is difficult to sell tickets for. So memory selects. It keeps the card game. It forgets the man reading a newspaper in the corner. You continue toward the sheriff's office. Law enforcement becomes another area where mythology simplifies reality. Western towns use different systems of sheriffs, marshals, constables, deputies, private guards, and other local authorities depending on jurisdiction and period. Many communities also write ordinances regulating daily behavior. The popular phrase lawless West can therefore be misleading. Some places certainly experience serial crime. Others are relatively orderly for long stretches. Many communities care intensely about property, business, sanitation, livestock, weapons, and public conduct. A town hoping to attract families and investment has reasons to prefer predictable streets. You notice a notice board beside the office. Rules are posted. The idea feels almost disappointingly bureaucratic. But bureaucracy is everywhere once you start looking. Mining claims, land deeds, marriage records, business licenses, railroad schedules, tax receipts, court documents, postal forms. The West produces paper almost as efficiently as dust. You step into a clerk's office. Shelves hold ledgers. The room is silent. A pen rests beside an ink bottle. Here is another forgotten truth. The expansion of Western settlement requires enormous amounts of record keeping. Property must be described, debts recorded, contracts signed, livestock counted, goods ordered, letters written. Even people seeking freedom from older communities often enter new systems of paperwork. The open frontier has a desk. You look through a window toward the street. A cowboy rides past. I is not carrying 2 revolvers. I is carrying a coil of rope. That small difference says almost everything. Firearms certainly exist throughout the West. They are tools for hunting, personal protection, military use, law enforcement, and other purposes. But the image of nearly everyone walking continuously armed in the same dramatic style is too simple. Rules about carrying weapons differ between towns and territories. Some communities restrict them within town limits or require visitors to surrender certain weapons temporarily. The exact enforcement of those rules is another matter. Historians debate how consistently some ordinances were followed, and how representative surviving examples really are. The uncertainty is important. One famous town's rule cannot describe an entire region across decades. You step back outside. A man is repairing a wagon wheel. Another loads sacks into a store. A woman shakes a rug from an upstairs window. A child chases a chicken. This is the Western street Hollywood has little patience for. Nothing is happening, and everything is happening. People are maintaining life. You follow the sound of hammering toward a construction site. A new house is being built. The men measure boards carefully. A mistake wastes material. You notice how much settlement depends on cooperation. Neighbors help raise structures. Families share tools. Workers exchange labor. People lend animals. Stores extend credit. Information passes informally. The myth of complete individual independence does not fit comfortably with what you have seen. People certainly value self-reliance. They also need one another. Isolation makes cooperation more important, not less. A household days from a large city cannot simply replace every lost skill through money. A neighbor who knows how to repair a roof may matter more than a heroic reputation. You continue beyond the new house toward a ranch. The owner is studying accounts. Livestock prices have changed. Feed costs money. Weather has been poor. This is another quiet correction to Western mythology. Ranching is a business. Romantic landscapes do not pay debts by themselves. Cattle must be sold at workable prices. Animals become sick. Markets fluctuate. Transportation costs matter. Land access changes. Drought can ruin plans built carefully over years. A rancher spends time thinking about numbers. You look at the ledger. The cowboy outside may appear freer. His employer is calculating wages. You walk toward the bunkhouse. Several workers are sitting around after supper. No one is planning a duel. One man repairs a glove. Another writes a letter. Someone lies on a bunk reading. A fourth man says almost nothing. This may be closer to the average Western evening. Fatigue removes much of the dramatic energy. After 12 hours of work, even legendary characters would probably like to sit down. You remember the cattle camp, the hard ground, the cold night air, the repeated watch shifts. Adventure feels different when it interrupts sleep. You leave the ranch as darkness approaches. Farther down the road, a train whistle sound. Railroads are another force that later Western stories sometimes treat strangely. They symbolize modernity arriving to end the frontier. But they are also part of Western life for decades. Railroad towns, workers, schedules, depots, freight systems, hotels, telegraph offices, and new markets all become deeply woven into this region. The Old West and the Modern West overlap. A cowboy can ride beside telegraph poles. A mining town can order manufactured goods from far away. A ranch family can read a mail-order catalog. A photographer can preserve an image that looks ancient to you, while standing only a train ride from a growing city. The frontier is not frozen in one year. It changes constantly. You hear another whistle. The sound seems to divide two worlds that actually existed together. This is where historical uncertainty becomes especially interesting. Even the question of when the Wild West ended has no single answer. Some people point to the closing of the frontier in demographic terms near the end of the 19th century. Others emphasize changes in open-range ranching, native sovereignty, federal control, railroad expansion, urban growth, or the transformation of particular regions. For the people living there, no bell rang announcing that the Wild West was finished. Tuesday simply became Wednesday. A fence appeared. A railroad arrived. A town grew. A child became an adult. The world changed gradually. Solely. You continue walking as stars appear. The empty ghost town from earlier is somewhere behind you. The active town glows ahead. Between them lies the real West, not a single legend. A million routines. Meals cooked. Invoices written. Boots repaired. Children taught, animals watered, letters opened, floors swept. These actions rarely become movies, yet they are what made the larger story possible. I begin to understand why myth and reality should not be treated as enemies. The legend can be beautiful. It can preserve an emotional image of space movement, possibility, and change. But beneath it lies something quieter and more human. And that quieter story has its own beauty. You stop near a fence post. Someone has left an old horseshoe hanging from a nail. The iron is rusted. It may once have belonged to an ordinary working horse. No one knows which one. That small object pulls your attention in another direction. The Wild West survives not only in stories, it survives in things. Pocket watches, quilts, letters, cooking pots, photographs, buttons, tools, objects that passed through ordinary hands. Tomorrow you will begin looking at them more closely, and the West will become smaller again, small enough to fit inside a pocket. Section 19. You leave the fence post behind and continue along the road with the old horseshoe still in your thoughts. It was only a piece of iron, no name, no date, no story attached, and yet for a moment it seemed to hold the entire West inside its curved shape. This is how ordinary objects work. They survive quietly. A town may vanish, a ranch may change owners, a family may move hundreds of miles away, but a spoon, a photograph, a quilt, or a pocket watch can remain long after the people who used them are gone. You enter a small house at the edge of town. The room is dim and cool. A wooden chest rests beneath the window. Its surface has been scratched by years of moving, lifting, and use. You open it carefully. Inside lies a folded quilt. The fabric is faded. Some pieces are blue. Others are brown, red, cream, or patterned with tiny flowers. Nothing matches perfectly. That may be the point. A quilt can contain pieces of older clothing, leftover fabric, purchased cloth, or scraps exchanged between neighbors. You unfold one corner. A square of dark wool may once have belonged to a man's shirt. Another piece might have come from a child's dress. A brighter patch may have been saved because the fabric was too good to waste. The quilt is warm because many small things were preserved instead of discarded. You think back to the sewing basket you saw earlier. Cloth has a long life on the frontier. A dress becomes a smaller dress. A shirt becomes patches. A worn garment becomes quilt pieces. The quilt itself may eventually be repaired. Objects do not move cleanly from new to old. They change purpose. This is one well-established feature of 19th century household life. Textiles were valuable enough to be reused, altered, handed down, and repaired repeatedly. You fold the quilt again. Beneath it rests a photograph. The card is stiff for film. The image has faded slightly. A family sits together in a studio. They look serious. You already know not to assume sadness. Photography is formal. Exposure times, portrait conventions, and the expense of a sitting all encourage people to remain still. You study the faces. A woman wears her better dress. A man has combed his hair carefully. A child appears to be struggling not to move. The backdrop behind them shows an elegant painted interior that almost certainly does not belong to their house. The photograph is both truthful and artificial. These people really stood together, but they chose how they wished to be remembered. You turn the card over. Someone has written a name. The ink has faded. Part of the surname is difficult to read. That uncertainty is common. Photographs often survive after the identifying information disappears. A face remains. The story does not. You place it beside the quilt. Next comes a small pocket watch. Its metal case is scratched. You press the latch. The cover opens. Inside, delicate hands rest above faded numbers. Perhaps the watch once belonged to a railroad worker. Perhaps to a merchant. Perhaps to someone who simply wanted to know the hour without looking for a town clock. Portable timekeeping becomes increasingly important as railroad schedules, business appointments, and standardized time spread through Western communities. A watch can be practical and deeply personal. It may be expensive enough to receive as a gift. It may be engraved. It may pass from parent to child. You wind it carefully. Nothing happens. The mechanism has been still for decades. Yet the object once controlled small parts of someone's day. Leave for the station. Open the store. Meet the wagon. Return before dark. Time once lived inside this case. Now it is quiet. You continue through the chest. A bundle of letters appears. The paper has yellowed along the folds. Some pages have been opened so many times that the creases are nearly transparent. You remember waiting at the post office. Now you see what happened after the letters arrived. Some were kept. One begins with ordinary family news. Another mentions weather. A third discusses money. There may be a request for seeds, a complaint about travel, or a few affectionate lines written by someone hundreds of miles away. The remarkable thing is how unremarkable most of it feels. People rarely write letters expecting historians to read them. They discuss what matters that week. A sick relative, a new stuff, a child's behavior, the price of land, a delayed journey, a garden that failed. That is why letters can feel so intimate. They were not written for history. You notice one line where the ink is blurred. Perhaps water fell onto the page. Perhaps someone cried. Perhaps the letter was simply read near an open window during rain. You cannot know. Historical objects invite imagination, but they also require restraint. A stain is still only a stain unless evidence says more. This is one of the areas where historians remain uncertain. Objects preserve physical traces beautifully, but their meanings can be difficult to recover. A scratched watch may have been treasured or neglected. A broken cup may have been repaired because it was sentimental, or because buying another one cost money. You can see use. You cannot always see emotion. You leave the chest and move toward the kitchen. A cast iron skillet hangs beside the stove. Its surface is dark and smooth from years of cooking. You have seen cookware like this at trail camps and family tables. Here it seems almost ordinary enough to disappear from attention. That is precisely why it matters. A skillet may prepare thousands of meals without receiving a single mention in a diary. Eggs, potatoes, meat, cornbread, gravy. Whatever ingredients the household has that morning, the handle becomes polished where hands grip it. The bottom shows marks from heat. One edge has been repaired. Someone decided the pan was worth saving. You look at a wooden spoon nearby. Its bowl is worn thin. No museum label is necessary to explain what happened. It was used, again and again. You move into a workshop. Tools line the wall. A hammer, a handsaw, a file, a brace and bit. Leather working tools, perhaps a small plane for smoothing a wood. Each carries marks from the person who held it. Tool handles can become shaped by repeated contact. A carpenter may recognize his own hammer instantly among several others. A ranch worker may know exactly how a particular knife sits in the hand. Objects develop familiarity. You pick up a worn wooden handle. It feels almost designed for your palm, but it was not designed that way. Time shaped it. In another corner lies a child's object, a small wooden toy, perhaps a carved animal, perhaps a simple doll. Children's possessions survive less frequently than adult tools because they are easily broken, lost, or discarded. That makes them especially revealing when they do remain. You imagine the child carrying it along the boardwalk, perhaps to school, perhaps on a long wagon journey. The toy would have mattered in a way no store ledger could record. A single small object can make the past feel younger. You set it down gently. Farther along you notice a tin cup. Its rim is dented. The handle has been resoldered. This could belong to almost anyone. A cowboy, a miner, a railroad worker, a traveler. Tinware is practical because it is light, durable, and relatively inexpensive. It also tells you something about movement. Ceramic breaks, glass breaks, metal survives being packed into wagons, saddlebags, and camp equipment. You imagine drinking coffee from this cup beside a cold morning fire. The cup is not elegant, neither is the coffee. Both do the job. You continue into a small bedroom. A hairbrush rests on a washstand. Beside it sits a hand mirror. The glass is cloudy. The wooden frame shows small cracks. Personal grooming often disappears from Western storytelling. Yet people still comb hair, shave, wash faces, clean teeth by the methods available to them, mend clothes and prepare themselves for social occasions. Not every morning is spent rushing toward adventure. Sometimes you simply want your hair to behave. The thought feels gently reassuring. You look into the mirror. Your reflection is distorted by age. Round the edge, the silvering has darkened. How many faces appeared here before yours? A bride preparing for a photograph. A child checking a new haircut. A traveler shaving before leaving town. You will never know. You step outside and visit a small local museum decades later in your imagination. Objects like these sit behind glass now. Labels give dates when known. A quilt may be linked to a family. A saddle may carry a ranch name. A photograph may finally have identities written beneath it. But many objects arrive with incomplete stories, believed to have belonged to, possibly used at, date uncertain. Museum work often involves careful uncertainty. It is better to omit what cannot be known than to turn every object into a legend. You appreciate that restraint. The Wild West has enough legends already. You return to the road as afternoon light becomes golden. A pocket watch can tell you about time. A quilt can reveal reuse and domestic labor. A ledger shows purchase. A broken bottle can reveal trade. A child's toy can suggest family life. Even a horseshoe can tell you something about animals' transportation and work. Together, these small objects create a history closer to the hand. You no longer need a dramatic event to feel connected to the past. You need a worn spoon, a faded photograph, a letter folded too many times. You pass beside the road. The town ahead looks different now. Every doorway seems filled with objects. Every room holds things touched daily and rarely noticed. Most will vanish. Some will survive by accident. A few will be carefully saved. And as the sun lowers over the rooftops, you realize that the frontier itself is beginning to become one of those preserved things. A memory, a photograph, a story told by someone who remembers when the road had no railroad beside it. You are approaching the end of your journey. Soon fences will spread, rail lines will multiply, old trails will fade. Children born in frontier cabins will grow old in a world that calls their childhood history, and you will watch the Wild West quietly change from daily life into memory. Section 20. You leave the small collection of objects behind and step once more onto the western road. The evening is calm. Sunlight rests across rooftops, fences, telegraph poles, and distant hills in a soft amber glow. Somewhere behind you, an old pocket watch remains silent inside a wooden chest. Ahead, time is moving everywhere. The frontier you have been walking through is changing, not suddenly. There is no single morning when people wake and discover that the Wild West has ended. Instead, change arrives one fence post at a time, one railroad station, one new school, one deeper well, one telegraph wire, one family deciding to remain permanently instead of moving farther west. You follow the road beyond town. A rancher is stretching barbed wire between wooden posts. You have seen fences before, but now they seem more important. For much of the earlier cattle era, enormous areas of western grassland functioned as open range. Livestock could move across broad spaces and long cattle drives depended upon access to water and grazing. Barbed wire begins changing that landscape dramatically during the 1870s and 1880s. It is inexpensive compared with many older fencing methods. It requires relatively little timber. Most importantly, it can divide enormous spaces. You hear the wire tighten. The sound is small. Its consequences are not. Land that once appeared open becomes bounded. Water sources become controlled. Ranching practices change. Farmers protect crops. Property becomes more visibly divided. The famous open landscape does not disappear, but movement across it becomes more complicated. You continue alongside the fence. A cowboy approaches from the opposite direction. He looks familiar. Dusty boots, worn saddle, sun-darkened hat, but his job is changing too. The long cattle drives that later become central to cowboy mythology represent only a relatively brief period of Western history. Railroad expansion brings cattle markets closer. Fences limit older trail routes. Ranching becomes increasingly settled. Cowboys remain. They simply perform more of the work you have already seen. Checking cattle, repairing fences, branding, moving animals between pastures, maintaining equipment. Working from permanent ranch headquarters, the cowboy does not vanish when the great drives decline. He becomes less cinematic. You watch him stop beside a broken fence post. He dismounts. Naturally, there is something to repair. It feels like the perfect continuation of everything you have learned. You move onward. A locomotive whistle crosses the plain. The railroad now reaches a town that once depended entirely upon wagon freight. You walk toward the station. The platform is busy. Crates are stacked beneath the roof. Mailbags wait near the door. A family stands beside several trunks. A merchant examines an invoice. Children stare at the locomotive. The train arrives surrounded by steam and noise. Railroads transform Western communities in ways that extend far beyond transportation. Goods arrive more cheaply. Mail becomes faster. Livestock can reach distant markets. People travel farther in less time. Newspapers arrive sooner. Manufactured objects become easier to obtain. A household that once waited months for certain supplies may now order from a catalogue and receive them through increasingly organized transportation networks. You think about the old general store. Its shelves will change. More canned foods, more manufactured clothing, more tools, more decorative objects. Perhaps even items nobody in town knew they needed until a catalogue showed them. The frontier household becomes connected to distant factories and businesses. Isolation begins to shrink. Not everywhere, not at once. Some ranches remain remote. Some mountain settlements are difficult to reach. Some communities are bypassed entirely by new rail lines. Modernization does not spread evenly across a map, but the direction is clear. You step inside the station. A clock hangs above the ticket window. Its hands matter. Railroads help encourage standardized time because trains moving across large distances need coordinated schedules. The adoption of standard railway time in North America in 1883 helps replace the confusing patchwork of local solar times used in many communities. You remember the watch repairer. His tiny gears suddenly seem connected to continental change. A person who once measured the day mostly by sunlight now has another authority. The timetable. The train leaves. You follow the telegraph wire instead. It runs into a town that has grown larger since your first visit. There are more buildings now. Some streets have been improved. A brick structure stands where a wooden building once stood. Brick offers an advantage towns understand painfully well. Fire. Western towns built largely from timber can suffer devastating fires. A stovepipe overheats. A lamp falls. A kitchen fire spreads. Dry wooden buildings stand close together. Wind does the rest. Growing communities therefore begin adopting iron regulations, organized fire companies, better water systems, and more fire-resistant construction where resources allow. The Wild West becomes safer partly through ordinances. You can almost hear Hollywood just sigh. You continue down the street. There is a bank now, a larger hotel, a newspaper office, several churches, a school with more than one classroom. The original one-room schoolhouse still stands farther out, but fewer children use it. The settlement has become a town. The town is beginning to look like a city. You pass the saloon. It is still open. Inside people talk exactly as they did before, but beside it now stands a business selling manufactured furniture. Across the street, a photographer displays family portraits. The West is learning to preserve images of itself. That matters. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, photographers, writers, former cowboys, settlers, native people, soldiers, performers, journalists, and travelers all contribute to the growing memory of Western life. The people who lived through the frontier period begin telling others what it was like. Memory enters the story, and memory is selective. You meet an elderly ranch worker sitting on a porch. He remembers cattle drives from decades earlier. The road he once followed is partly fenced now. The town where he spent one winter has disappeared. He tells a younger listener about riding beneath the enormous skies. He remembers cold mornings, bad coffee, a horse he loved, a cook he disliked, a river crossing, and does not mention every ordinary day. Nobody could. Years compress experience. Weeks of boredom disappear. One difficult night survives. A funny mistake survives. A remarkable storm survives. This is how history slowly becomes story. You sit nearby. The younger listener asks whether the old days were better. The rancher pauses. Perhaps he says yes. Perhaps he says no. Perhaps his answer depends on which day he remembers. Historians face exactly this problem when using memoirs written decades after events. Memory is valuable. It is also imperfect. People reshape their past without necessarily intending to deceive. Later experiences influence earlier memories. Popular Western stories may even influence the way participants describe their own lives. You cannot always separate memory from myth completely. That uncertainty is part of the final frontier you encounter, not the uncertainty of geography, the uncertainty of remembering. You stand and walk farther. Another sign of change appears in the landscape. Native communities remain here, but their world has been transformed profoundly and often painfully by expanding settlement, federal policies, warfare, forced removal, reservation systems, destruction of bison herds, and restrictions on traditional lifeways. The peaceful bedtime path you have followed should not erase that reality. The expansion called the frontier by settlers was already home to indigenous nations with histories extending far beyond the 19th century. Their lives did not begin when newcomers arrived, and their histories did not end when popular accounts declared the frontier closed. You pause beside the open plain. There are layers beneath every western road. Native trails, Spanish and Mexican routes, emigrant wagon paths, cattle trails, railroad grades, modern roads that will someday cover portions of them all. No single group owns the entire story. The West is a landscape of overlapping memories. You continue towards sunset. In 1890, the United States Census Bureau reported that a clear frontier line could no longer be identified in the way it had previously been mapped. Later historian Frederick Jackson Turner would famously use that development when discussing the significance of the frontier. But administrative language cannot tell people exactly when their everyday world changed. A ranch family in 1890 still wakes to livestock. A miner still descends into a shaft. A teacher still opens a school. A cook still makes coffee. The supposed end of the frontier does not end anyone's breakfast. You smile at that. History prefers dates. Life prefers continuity. The sun lowers. You return toward the first town you entered many hours ago. It feels familiar now. The boardwalk, the stable, the store, the boarding house, the saloon windows, but you can see beneath the legend. You know about the muddy streets after rain, the heavy laundry, the shared school books, the store credit, the repaired boots, the long medical rides, the letters that arrived late, the night watches, the freight wagons, the dried fruit, the quilt scraps, the telegraph operator listening carefully to clicks in a small room. These are the facts that remain when the gun smoke of mythology clears. Ordinary people shaped the Wild West simply by continuing their lives. They woke, worked, cooked, waited, mended, traveled, raised children, buried loved ones, changed jobs, built houses, left towns, remembered, and eventually others began remembering for them. Museums collected saddles and dishes, families preserved photographs. Old trails received markers. Abandoned towns became historical sites. Cowboy songs were written down. Stories became books. Books became films. Films created new memories for people who had never seen the West. The everyday frontier slowly became legend. You stop at the end of the boardwalk. Night is returning. A shopkeeper closes his shutters just as he did when you first arrived. A horse shifts inside the stable. Coffee cools in a kitchen. Somewhere someone folds a letter. Nothing spectacular happens. That feels exactly right. El began by opening a forgotten door. Now standing beneath the western evening sky, you realize what was hidden behind it. Not one grand secret, 100 small ones. The Wild West was not only a place of famous names and dramatic stories, it was a place where millions of ordinary moments passed quietly beneath enormous skies. And perhaps that is why it feels so peaceful to finally notice them. Word count 1 mile. The town grows softer around you now. The last sunlight slips from the rooftops, leaving only a narrow line of gold along the distant hills. You walk slowly back along the boardwalk. There is nowhere else you need to reach tonight. Behind one window a lamp is turned lower. Behind another a family finishes its conversation. The stable has become quiet. Horses breathe softly in their stalls and the faint smell of hay drifts into the cool air. Far beyond town the plains stretch beneath the stars. Old cattle trails cross them invisibly. Wagon wheels once pressed into that ground. Hooves followed. Boots followed. Rain softened the tracks. Grass returned. Time covered almost everything. You let the sounds of the journey fade one by one. The blacksmith's hammer is silent. The schoolhouse is empty. The telegraph key has stopped clicking. The general store ledger is closed. The coffee pot beside the cattle camp rests among cold ashes. A quilt lies folded inside a wooden chest. A faded photograph waits in darkness, and somewhere in an abandoned town, moonlight falls through a window that no longer has glass. Nothing asks to be remembered loudly. That was never the nature of these stories. They survive in small objects, quiet places, and ordinary routines. You have simply spent a little time listening. Now the road behind you grows dim. The buildings become silhouettes. Above them the stars remain clear and patient. You can allow the Old West to drift farther away. No need to hold every fact. No need to remember every name. Just keep the feeling of that quiet street, the cooling evening air, and the gentle sense that countless ordinary lives once moved here beneath the same night sky. The final lamp goes dark. The road disappears, and history becomes quiet again. Sleep well.